Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and tonight I am joined by a friend and listener who appeared on the STVD podcast way back in, March of 2018. So it's only been 29 months, or maybe half as long as this year has felt. So let's welcome back the cha-cha to my Hazel. It's Kimber. Hey, Kimber.
Hey, Scott.
So I didn't realize it had been that long since you've been on the podcast. Is that how long ago Crown Season 1 was? Was it really that long ago?
I think so. Nothing's really changed since then, so we're all good.
Okay. Well, although there's a chance that we may eventually talk about The Crown again in one day or one evening, we are actually here to discuss the show that seems to be the series to watch as of late, The Umbrella Academy. Of course, what's kind of intriguing about that is, I don't know if it's just me, but there didn't seem to be nearly as much attention paid to the series when the first season premiered back in early 2019. So I don't know if it's maybe with the majority of people still living under COVID-19 quarantine rules, or people have binged so much over the last 2 months there's nothing left to watch. I don't know. So anything that's new and fresh becomes such a much bigger deal. But I looked into it, like season 1, like last year, had a total of like 45 million downloads. And they were, the first week that Umbrella Academy season 2 premiered, they were already promoting it on TV as 53 million people and counting have watched season 2. So it's that rare instance of the show just exploding in popularity in its sophomore season more than it did in its first season. Now, I'm going to assume that not the person who I'm recording with tonight, but some of the listeners have already listened to the Doom Patrol podcast that Brian and I did a couple of weeks ago. And if you haven't, because you haven't watched Doom Patrol yet, we did design that podcast so you can listen to the first half hour without ever having watched the show. It's spoiler free, gives you some history on the Doom Patrol and why, good Lord, you should give that series a shot if you have HBO Max, of course. The only reason I'm mentioning it, other than to promote a podcast I'm proud of, is because we are going to be following a somewhat similar, yet still different format with this podcast. Which means we're going to dip a little bit into the history of the Umbrella Academy. Obviously not nearly as much because we only got a few years worth of the Umbrella Academy as opposed to 57 years of the Doom Patrol. And then we will be delving into both Season 1 and Season 2 of the Umbrella Academy. And Kimber will be so happy because then he'll have something to say. Dude, the beginnings of these podcasts were always me going on for a while, so people have gotten used to it.
We're going to cover decades of story in whatever time we've got here.
It's gonna feel brisk and brief. It's gonna be like 15 hours. Anyway, so a little bit about the Umbrella Academy just in general. The first 2 seasons of this Netflix series, well, they're essentially based on 2 comic book limited series that were published back in 2007 and 2008. Interesting note that the writer-creator is, I should say, Gerald Way, who's also the lead singer for the band My Chemical Romance. I didn't even realize that until a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, wow, that's quite a diverse set of talents that dude has. Let's just say that the adaptations, I would say they ground the work a bit more than the comics. The comics tend to be, believe it or not, a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, crazier than what we've seen in both seasons of the Umbrella Academy. I'll just give like one little example. For season 1, one of the major storylines, as we all know, if not the major storyline, deals with Vanya. Now, in the comic book series, there's actually this evil organization called the Orchestra Verdamnant, or Verdamtent, whatever, which eventually recruits Vanya to complete their plan to play the Apocalypse Suite, which will actually bring about the end of the world. In fact, that's what the entire limited series that season 1 is based on is named, is titled. It's called Umbrella Academy Apocalypse Suite. Now, and trust me, we could literally spend 2 entire podcasts detailing the differences between the second limited series, which is Umbrella Academy Dallas, and the second season. I mean, it's so very different. It's hard for me to say it's even based on it anymore. I'd say it's more inspired by it. They both take place in the 60s and they deal with the JFK assassination. After that, the storylines diverge are quite different, to put it mildly. So if anyone out there has curiosity, I imagine they do, I'm sure you can track them down and trade paperbacks. See for yourself. Look it up on Amazon if you still can't go into stores where you live. Be my guest. I'm just telling you, it's very, very, very different. And finally, also, if anyone who listened to the Doom Patrol podcast will remember, and if you're listening to this podcast, this means you've watched the Umbrella Academy. And now I'm repeating myself because I'm just going to tell you to watch Doom Patrol again. The creator of Umbrella Academy actually said that the biggest influence and inspiration for his work was the Grant Morrison run on Doom Patrol. So there, look, we're in sync here. So when you watch Doom Patrol, which does take many of its crazier cues from the Morrison era of Doom Patrol, you can definitely see how one begat the other. Obviously, there are also other influences on the work. If the Doom Patrol is an influence, then obviously the X-Men must be an influence as well, because they kind of go hand in hand. I'm sure there are several others. I'm sure. Hey, Kimber, I bet you even can pick out a few influences.
Yeah, I heard an interview with Way where he also mentioned the Watchmen. I think it's just because it's got like such a deep backstory and universe, right down to like in the Watchmen, there are like toys and products of the Watchmen within that story, just like there are toys, books, action figures, comic books of the Umbrella Academy.
Right.
I think that's like, for me, that was one thing that felt like it, and just the overall thing, like just creating a universe of heroes that you've never heard of any before, that you can just do whatever you want to with them. I mean, that's the great thing about just creating a set of new heroes from whole cloth. You can do what you want. You can kill them off. You can have them turn bad. You can, it's not like dealing with an established universe like DC or Marvel.
Right. Well, what's kind of fun about all the things that we mentioned, Umbrella Academy, and then you can take it to even the Morrison run on Doom Patrol, or especially Watchmen. They are all notable for deconstructing what the traditional comic book storylines and superheroes are, all in their different ways. And so in a way, they do things that let's just say they're unconventional. It's probably the best way to put it. Dovetailing back to the actual series, I am certainly not going to get into all the writers and directors who worked on both seasons of the Umbrella Academy. Although people who are very well versed in television and who probably listen to our podcast will recognize names like say Andrew Bernstein, who's probably one of the most prolific and major TV directors. He basically has been on like every HBO series you've ever seen. However, I do want to give one specific shout out to the writer and actual showrunner for the Umbrella Academy. We all know how important showrunners are. If you follow TV, showrunners are incredibly important. This fellow, his name is Steve Blackman. Why am I pointing out Steve Blackman? Because he was also one of the main writer and producers from Fargo. He wrote a couple season 2 episodes. He also worked on Legion, where he shared writing credits for the entire season 1 of Legion, which anyone who listens to our podcast knows Fargo and Legion, kind of 2 of our favorite shows. We actually do podcasts on them. So I like that without knowing about this until like a week ago. Oh, Umbrella Academy now fits perfectly onto our shelf of podcasts because we've got that Fargo Legion. It's a connection. You can tell that Noah Hawley has his fingers in here somewhere, I guess. So I thought that was kind of cool. Alrighty then. So thus endeth the history lesson, which I know wasn't much history, but it was something. Let's get to what people really came here for. Let's talk about season 1. So, going back to season 1, you had that the series setup was around the far from ordinary family living in this big, bizarre house with pretty bizarre parenting issues. When they grow up, one of them writes a tell-all book that frankly pisses off everyone else in the family. And your first thought might be, wait a minute, are you talking about the Umbrella Academy or the Haunting of Hill House? Because it's the same setup. No, it just happens to be a similar skeleton, but the Umbrella Academy fleshes it out with, as we were just talking about, influences, nods to everything, all the comic book influences we already mentioned, like Doom Patrol and X-Men. And then, you can throw in like films and TV shows like The Prisoner or the Harry Potter movies, for God's sake. You can find little bits and pieces of everything here. Like any other first season of a series, we spend a lot of time not just simply introducing the characters, but learning more about them as the season proceeds, through their words and actions in the present, or I guess in Five's case, the future as well as a multitude of flashbacks to the past. And even if many episodes may feel more specific character-based than others, which is a technique that many shows have used over the years, Lost, Orange is the New Black, those shows do that all the time. I will give the Umbrella Academy a lot of credit. Unlike most of those series, I noticed that all of the principal characters, namely the family, appear in every single episode. There's never one episode where someone doesn't show up at some point, which you can't say about any of the other shows I just mentioned. So, like I said, over the course of the series, we get to know these 6 adopted siblings, 7 if you include Ben, of course, and how they were raised by Sir Reginald Hargreaves, someone who in season 1 seems to be a wildly eccentric, fastidious, and downright cruel multimillionaire who sought out all these children and quite literally were unexpectedly born on the same moment, the 19th hour of the day of October 1st, 1989. And the one thing I thought of, with season 1 back when I watched it a year ago and then when I rewatched it this week, one of the conceits of the story to begin with is that the creators built in this massive reserve of potential villains or replacements by saying that 43 were born at that same moment. Because wouldn't it have been safe to assume that means there's 36 other kids that have abilities. I know about the whole setup with the Leonard character in season 1, how he insisted he was born that day and thus he must be special too. My guess is that he wasn't born at that exact minute though, whereas all the other ones were born, at the 19th hour or whatever. Because plus in any given day, I'm pretty sure more than 43 children are born. These 43 were born at 7 o'clock in the evening, across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, just to sum up, these kids were brought up by this borderline sociopath to be superheroes, and the only nurturing care seems to be more provided by a robot and a talking chimpanzee, Pogo, who he's kind of like Alfred the Monkey Butler of the Hargreaves mansion. Again, he's talk about influences. He's just the latest in a long line of intelligent talking primates from comic books. DC, to their credit or not, I don't know if it's something to be that proud of, they kind of cornered the market in that many, many decades ago with Detective Chimp, which dates back to the mid-50s. Then you got, characters some people are more familiar with, like the supervillain Gorilla Grodd.
Yep.
People know from the animated series and the Flash TV show. I forgot that Grodd goes back to 1959. I always thought it was a 60s creation. Forgot 59. And, a number of others. There's one I mentioned on the Doom Patrol podcast. There's an infamous one called Monsieur Malade, the French beret-wearing, machine-gun-toting ape. Everyone's going, what about Planet of the Apes? Yeah, all the ones I just mentioned predate Planet of the Apes by several years. There are others, but let's stop going down this monkey hole because it is endless.
Yeah. The one thing the show is so weird from the get-go, like just like the setting, the characters and so on. Like when he first walks in and starts talking, I didn't even like bat an eyelash. It's like, oh yeah, of course there would just be like a monkey like butler running the house. Like didn't even give it a thought.
Exactly. It's to the credit of the show that you don't even question it from the get-go. It's just like, okay. Yeah. My only issue with him, because I can't in good conscience call him I can't in good conscience call him the conscience of the show, because we learn that he merely seems to bear witness to all the horrible things that, Sir Reggie does, ranging from his treatment of Vanya to sending Luther to the moon. There's never really a sense that Pogo ever tries to convince Reginald otherwise in any of these instances. He just puts on that usual sad and forlorn face that he pretty much has almost all the time.
Yeah.
He's like, sad monkey.
He's the servant in every way.
Right. Right.
to Reginald. Yeah, and then even though like in my mind I didn't even ask for it because like I was just kind of accepting of it. The fact that they give so much backstory in season 2 was just like a bonus to me. Like, oh, this is great. Now like things make sense. But I don't want to
Oh,
get ahead of us. Yeah.
one of my favorite parts of season 2 when we get there and
Yep.
we'll get into why. Even though if anyone who knows me, it's probably obvious. Actually, it's
The
funny.
the series jumps around too much in time. We shouldn't do the same thing. So
It's okay. If there are people who are listening who are only saw season 1 and haven't seen season 2 yet, knowing that they're going to get a Pogo backstory in season 2 is not the biggest spoiler. I'm not going to worry about that.
yeah. Spoiler: there's actually a backstory to a talking monkey.
No, if we were talking about the whole zombie version of it, no, anyway. So it's funny. I just realized that I've been going on this long. I haven't actually said what the plot or plots are of season 1.
Yeah.
Bad podcaster, very bad. In a nutshell, Five has returned to his family, albeit back in the body of a 13-year-old, while still having the consciousness of a 58-year-old man, due to his living 45 years in a post-apocalyptic future. He's back to try to stop that very apocalypse, which is only days away. What they don't know until practically the end of this journey is that the person responsible for the apocalypse is actually one of their own, Vanya, who everyone thought was merely ordinary. She turns out to be the most powerful one of them all, and is sent down a path of both self and world destruction by a psychopath who has insidiously wormed his way into her life and heart. So, getting back to just season 1 general, okay, just to give everyone a break here, unlike the Doom Patrol podcast, I will not be recapping and going through every single episode. My feeling with the season, and again, just watched it, so it's super fresh in my mind, but I would think it would be a good idea just to jump mid-season. Get to the 5th episode, because I think the 5th episode is the first really major episode of that season. I think it really kickstarts the rest of the season. It certainly sets up the next 2 that are distorted mirror images of each other, as one might gather from their titles being The Day That Wasn't and The Day That Was. And speaking of titles, the 5th episode being titled Number 5, and it's about number 5, it's pretty much as meta as you're going to get.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's so many important things that happen in that episode. I mean, obviously, if you've gotten to the 5th episode, you've already probably been hooked on the show at that point. But I would also go further. Like, the 5th episode is the one that makes you say, "Okay, I really made the good decision to stick with this show."
Yeah, you really. In going back and rewatching it a second and a third time, I forgot like how many episodes there. I mean, it's a 10-episode series, and they spend 40% of the time basically on setup, like it's all the infighting and the history and flashbacks, and the meat of the story really doesn't happen until halfway through the show. It's pretty remarkable. I didn't even realize it. Like, why did I hang in? I think because it's so weird and the infighting and so on is so compelling that I kind of lost sight that, there's a bigger narrative here, and where did that go? And then it picks up again in episode 5.
Exactly. It's probably one of the, I hate to say the shortcomings of the season, but it kind of is that it spends too much time feeling like setup. And we sometimes say that about a show, like its initial episode or 2, which is why it's rarely a good idea to judge a show by its pilot, especially if it's going to be, especially a serialized drama. But whatever the show is, sitcoms especially, because it's hard to be funny as well as introduce 7 or 8 characters. So when you pull it off, it's kind of amazing. Well done, cheers, or something like that. But usually once you get past like the 2nd episode, the story should be rolling. It should be rolling by the end of the 1st episode. And with this, it kind of it's not that things aren't happening, of course they are, but as far as things really starting to get into motion, where we start really getting into like, oh yeah, there's an apocalypse that needs to be averted. What's going on with that? Because it's almost like an afterthought for the first half of the season. And so it's definitely, this is one of those seasons, I think it's the back half is much more accelerated and much more exciting as a result of that. But like you said, there's so much good stuff in that first half. they're interesting characters. They are, generally speaking, they are well written. The visuals are pretty spot on and dazzling. The musical choices, kids, I'm going to have a whole section about music later on.
Yeah.
One of the hallmarks of the show is, the soundtrack, and little wonder that the original creator was a member of a rock band.
Oh, yeah.
The more I think about it.
Yeah, I think like the visuals, like I had, like some other things. It's got this whole like steampunk sort of vibe to it, like with Reginald with like the aviator hat and the goggles and the monocle. Like it's got this sort of out of time. Like you don't really know. Like it's 2019, but it doesn't look like our 2019.
Right.
Like nannies with like old fashioned prams pushing babies. Like it just doesn't look like our 2019. And so yeah. And like the West and people have also, I mean, I'm not original on this one, but like the first time I said like, oh, it's like the Royal Tenenbaums by Wes Anderson too. Like it's just this weird family with all these like oddball interests and like a father who's sort of like driving them to like be overachievers and, and it's kind of like off his rocker a little bit like that, in this big mansion filled with stuff, like I just felt like that was, but yeah, it keeps you interested, like, because I wanted to find out, like, oh, what's that thing in the background, and why do they have that, and why did this happen?
It's funny. Again, once you've watched the show, because the show does it as well, you'll see. But that's actually, it's those aspects of the show that you can definitely see the lineage between this and the many times aforementioned Doom Patrol, because they have that same kind of feel, including even. I mean, if you've even seen stills of like, say, like the Robot Man character, I mean, I always think of Robot Man as being the original steampunk creation, in comic books.
Rivets and
it's also one thing I think, and I think this was a Grant Morrison thing, and it might be one of the things that the comic books incorporated in the TV show is there is a certain weird sense of time on the show. Where on one hand it's taking place in modern day, but there are so many things like, wait, that feels very 50s or very 60s or whatever. And of course one can find that in a number of things. One can go back to like, say, like the Batman animated series or the Batman movie from 1989, where it was supposed to be modern day, but there are a lot of things that look like they're straight out of the 40s, like, the way the cars are designed, the Art Deco kind of nature. So it's definitely become kind of an interesting conceit over the last 40 odd years, where you have all these different fantasy pieces which are modern day, but they have this weird retro or, like you said, steampunk kind of feel to them. It's always, but I always appreciate that because it always makes for very arresting visuals, depending on how far you want to go with it. Go on.
Yeah, also narratively, it gets you out of the modern day with things like computers and cell phones. Like, that's a heavily trodden thing. Like, how many classic movies and stories would be ruined today by the presence of cell phones and computers?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Columbo would just like make a call and, use Columbo because I know what Columbo means to you. But, like if Columbo had a cell phone, like Columbo, like that series would be awful.
Yeah.
So like there's no cell phones in the Umbrella Academy. There's no computers. Like the TVs seem kind of like old fashioned, but the guns are modern and there's rocket ships. And so it's an interesting, the Hazel and Cha-Cha drive like a beat up Volvo,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. It's a mix. Yeah. You don't really know where it is, but it allows more freedom with the storytelling, I think.
No, I agree. I mean, at least for this series, I think it works out well. It would, because I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to recall if we do see like a cell phone used or not. I mean, I can't imagine there isn't one used, but I'm thinking if there's scenes like, with using the telephone booth and to call, the kid instead of, calling her on your actual phone, your regular phone. It's like, that's an example right there. Why wouldn't Allison have a phone? It doesn't even make sense. But
right.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought of
they use voicemail. There's like at one point where Allison leaves Vanya like a voicemail. I think it's like episode 9 or something like that, where Vanya's back in her apartment. She's checking like an old
answering machine. Yeah.
An answering machine.
Exactly. Which God was the last time we saw one of those.
Right.
So back to the specific episode I was talking about, which was the 5th episode. One of the many important things about that episode that you discover by the next season. Don't worry, not jumping to it, but I will mention this is the episode that more so than any other, except for maybe the very end, obviously, of the final episode, it's the major connecting piece to the events of the following season. The events of November 22nd, 1963, to be more precise. So that's kind of interesting as well. So I think it's a very important episode just in terms of the overall series. I did have one question though. Again, this is me. I'm not going to call it a nitpick because I'm not really. I don't mean it to be a negative thing. It's just something I noticed. When we're going through the whole backstory, or however you want to phrase it, of what's happened to number 5 since he went, was stuck in the post-apocalyptic future, and then when he eventually starts to work for the Commission as an assassin, and they do that kind of fun little technique of superimposing him over different historical film clips. And no, I'm not going to bring up where we used to work. It has nothing to do with that, please. That will never come up in a podcast. Who
doesn't like the Hindenburg blowing up?
That's exactly where I'm going. One of the film clips they use is the explosion of the Hindenburg. And it's like, okay, so therefore the implication is he had to go back in time and kill somebody to make sure that happened, to make sure it didn't get screwed up. But then later, when he pretends to take on the new position with the Commission, he once again he has his file, and he once again has to do something to ensure that the Hindenburg's going to explode. So am I the only one who noticed that and thought that was odd? Is that such a weird point in history where something keeps going wrong and someone has to keep going back and fixing it so the Hindenburg continually explodes? I thought that was very strange.
Yeah. I thought I read that was the first time and this is the thing about time travel and the problem with time travel in general, like narratively you can like interpret it in different ways. I read that was the first day of his job there, and the first thing he was given was the Hindenburg. And yeah, but who knows? Maybe that's a hot file that gets used over and over again. Maybe that. Yeah.
I just found it odd that while he was still early version of 5, when he's still as a 58-year-old guy, that the implication is one of his missions was he clearly had to go kill somebody to make sure the Hindenburg exploded, because that's why they use that clip behind him. But then later on, that's well past that, and he's stuck in the body of a 13-year-old, but he pretends to go along with the handler and takes the job with the Commission, a different job. He gets promoted, even though that doesn't look like a promotion to me. If you have, it's an office job. His file that he has to work with, and he makes the recommendation of who has to be killed, again has to do with the Hindenburg. Is it like I'm thinking, does something keep going wrong? Back in, was it the 1930s, right?
Right.
Does something keep going wrong where, the Hindenburg is not going to explode? Okay, we have to keep sending someone back over and over to make sure someone dies.
That's funny. I didn't make that connection. Doesn't the handler say, like, when she shows him like one of this like endless rooms of desks, is that each caseworker is assigned to one event? So maybe if you've got the Hindenburg file, that's your life's work. You just have to work, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for eternity, making sure that the Hindenburg like explodes.
That makes as much sense as anything else.
As anything else in the right. Like why is the world, and like the whole conceit of the show is that the Commission wants to make sure that the apocalypse really happens. So what is in it for the Commission that the apocalypse happens? Like, why, if they're managing all these different events, why is one of the critical events the end of the world? It seems like if you've got that event covered, you don't really have to cover any other events, provided that the world blows up. Like, you don't have to worry about the Hindenburg, or they show like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand before World War One, and like,
Well, right. I think it's and they even reference it on the show. God help us. It's the butterfly effect. So you have to make sure everything happens,
in sequence.
In sequence, because anything could derail that. I mean, good Lord, time travel is probably one of the most frequently discussed topics on this podcast over the last few years. I mean, just me and Dan talking about Dark alone, which is all about time travel. Then, you got the Flash TV show and a bunch of other ones. Legion got into time traveling in its third season. And I'm sure there's a couple other shows I'm not even thinking of right now that we've talked about. And the thing I always say from the get-go is, beyond first saying I'm a sucker for time travel stuff, but I think most people are to some extent. But one of the issues I'll always have is you need to establish the rules. If the rules aren't made clear, then there's going to be problems. Because this show specifically is very aware of paradoxes. The number 5 makes references to things of that nature, in both seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So you and obviously that time travel is playing a big part here. They get into some different concepts or conceits in season 2. We'll wait till we get there to talk about those. But it's because you have the dueling ideas. You have if something is meant to happen, it's going to happen, and you can't change it. But yet the premise of the show is that things are happening that are going to change some things. So you have to prevent them from being changed. So those kind of things kind of like, go up against one another. Like, wait a minute, if nothing can ever change, why are you even worried about this? But since they actually make reference to the butterfly effect, they are aware of that. But then again, they send killers to do jobs and they kill people willy-nilly. And that seems to, I was like, wait, if
it's a lot of butterflies.
Yeah, but say you can't step on a butterfly, but you can kill the poor, lady who owns the house or the maid or whatever.
Right.
Whatever.
Well, it's funny that like the thing that like there's got to be rules with time travel, and this is the first time I think that there's actually like a bureaucracy set up within the narrative to establish and hold people to the rules. Like there's an actual commission around time.
Well,
actually,
a show that we used to talk about on this podcast back when we used to cover the DC CW shows. Yet another show dealing with time travel is Legends of Tomorrow, and there is an organization that they are first dealing, going up against, and then pretty much are working for, which basically is the Commission. It's literally the same thing. They're all wearing suits. They all have to dispatch people to make corrections in the time stream to make sure everything. So, and I'm sure there are a number of other examples. I'm sure it's not just these 2 series. I'm sure. I don't know if they got into it in Doctor Who, but I wouldn't be shocked because I don't know anything about Doctor Who.
Yeah. It's a little bit like The Matrix has got a little bit of that in it. There's people trying to control like the time stream, kind of. I don't want to get into the whole Matrix thing.
It's very Men in Blackish as well.
Yes.
So it does have that feeling to it as well.
Yeah, people in suits. And again, it's kind of out of time. Like that commission, like everybody's using a typewriter and dressing like it's like, IBM in the 1950s, like before computers, like the blue suits and the ties.
I love the idea of that, and I was thinking about it, and I think part of the reason for it. Well, okay, first of all, the first reason is just the look and the aesthetic. And it's a style choice, obviously. But as far as just the practicality of it, because I was thinking about this, and I can't remember. There's another either book or TV show or movie. I can't think of what it is, and maybe that's what I'm thinking of, and I can't remember. Again, don't remember. But there's something to the idea of keeping everything in a very old-fashioned analog way of doing things because it cuts down on how things can suddenly go wrong. Like if things are being done with typewriters and papers and vacuum tubes, whatever, then there's no computer that people can suddenly reprogram or
Right.
or shut down or go on the fritz or
Yeah.
because you avoid all that.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah.
that's so it's hysterical when you even get into the room where you can view different points in time, which we get into again. It's a season 2 thing, but it looks like the old timey operator thing that you see like
Switchboard,
in the 30s. Switchboard operator, exactly.
Yeah.
Which you would see in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or even in the 60s. I mean, you even see it in I always forget you even see it in Mad Men sometimes.
Yeah.
Um,
Sending messages by those pneumatic tubes. I mean, I just love that. And
that was the phrase, pneumatic tube. That's true.
yeah, and they just show up everywhere, like in a vending machine or in a hotel, like mini fridge, or like wherever, like you would in a bowling alley, like it comes through like the bowling ball return thing, like those tubes just show up everywhere, and I just love that.
I love that the commission apparently has the ability, even with their like you said, the pneumatic tube system, to just subvert reality. Like 'cause for it to pop up in the bowling alley was especially ridiculous at the time. It's like,
Yeah.
whatever. So
But before we leave the time travel thing, and we'll probably come back to it, but like one other influence that it was a show that I loved the first couple of seasons was Heroes. It's a very similar sort of like oddball group of people that had to get together on some sort of mission to save the world, but they didn't really know what their parts were in it and what role and who was bad and who was the good guy. And like there was time travel in that too. And I liked, people dealing with themselves in different time streams, communicating to one another. But that's another influence that I couldn't help but see a little bit when I watched this show.
I could see that, probably based on my and many people's increasing disdain for Heroes. Probably why I just decided not to mention.
Yeah, I only watched the first 2 seasons. I didn't watch any more.
Wait, you didn't watch the Carnival season? It's so stupid.
Anyway,
back to this episode. Because one of the important things about the episode was it introduces the idea and the concepts of the commission, of the handler, all those things, which obviously are going to play a major part in the series from this point on. It's a very important character building episode also because, it makes number 5 something more than just the snarky asshole that he's been for the first 4.5 episodes. And we probably also get the introduction of what I would say is one of the saddest storylines of the entire season, is the whole, speaking of time travel, it's when Klaus time travels to, 1968 Vietnam. Because, and as we learn what happened there in subsequent episodes, it gives Klaus a depth that we didn't have from him before that. And I think that's probably why, I'm always surprised. Well, I shouldn't say I'm surprised. Mildly surprised. Most people, when they say who their favorite character is on the show, they usually go to number 5. That's, that's like, to me, saying number 5 is kind of like saying Tyrion's your favorite character on Game of Thrones. It's like, no, really? Klaus is surprisingly popular, though. Klaus tends to be the pick from a lot of most other people. Or if he's not if he's not their first choice, he's their second choice. And I remember thinking, really? Klaus? But I hadn't watched I had to go back and rewatch the first season. And it's like, oh, okay, I forgot about all this. And he really is great in season 2, but we're not to season 2 yet.
Yeah.
Now,
and I think it's a sad story, but like, I think when you look across the characters, like they've each experienced a loss. Like Klaus lost, his lover in Vietnam. Allison lost her family through what she had happen. I think Luther, by being jettisoned off to live on the moon for a few years, like in some ways, like lost his dad, like along the way. And he was such a, he's the one that stayed there forever. He was the last member of the Umbrella Academy, still serving his dad. I think, what's his name? The knife throwing Diego, like feels like a loss for the mother at some point. So I think like they're all experiencing like an individual loss that you see, throughout the first season, that in some ways kind of brings them back together.
Well, a trope of this show and any storylines like this, especially when you have a ragtag bunch of flawed individuals
Mhm.
or freaks or whatever you want to call them, depending on which show we're talking about, they all have a certain tragic story that they're
Mhm.
trying to overcome, trying to deal with, whatever. Whether it be the loss of a family member, loss of a lover, loss of their own self, or loss of identity, etc. Certainly the case here. The thing, but one of the things I noted about watching season one over again, and I mean, everything we just mentioned is true as far as each of the characters and certain sad aspects of what they're dealing with, especially in terms of loss. But I was actually thinking about you know what were the three saddest points in the whole season one for me, and I noticed that. Okay, first, oh, by the way, none of them involve Diego and his robot mom or the dead detective because it's not that they're not sad, but I'm just like, you know, Diego comes off. Diego's a much better character in season two. Again,
I would
we'll
totally
get there.
agree.
Um,
I totally forgot about the detective girlfriend story until I rewatched season one after I watched season two. I was there like, oh my God, I totally forgot that whole storyline and
it's
that character. It was so
it's largely
throwaway
forget
for me.
it's largely forgettable
Yeah.
and as I guess you probably know, and I'll just clue everyone else in, that is also not from the comics. There's an entirely different inspector who's involved with the Umbrella Academy, at
Mhm.
least in season one, and it is not some ex-girlfriend of Diego's, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
But when I was thinking about it, for me, the things I thought were the saddest things in season three, or if I gave my little top three, they all involve the same character. And it's not Vanya, it's Allison. So for me, like my number three one would be the part where she's unable to speak due to her throat being cut. So she's crammed
Mhm.
together with Luther in the payphone booth. So Luther ends up having to be on the phone telling Allison's daughter how much he misses her and how much she thinks about her. But he's really obviously talking about himself and Allison
Yep.
and how he
It's a
feels
great scene. Great
super
scene.
sad. And also going to your point of why doesn't she have a cell phone? Um, Number two, and people are going to think this must be number one, but no, my number two one is Allison's realization that she played a major part in Vanya's torturous childhood. When we
Hmm.
see her telling Vanya a rumor that she thinks of herself as ordinary. And I know a lot
Hmm.
of people, and by the way, I don't know if there's a more initially shocking moment in the entire season than when Vanya slashes Allison's throat. I think that's the most shocking moment in the season for
Hmm.
me. Because the way that episode ends, oh God, can you imagine if this wasn't a bingy show, if it was a show you had to wait till the following week? There's every implication she just killed her. It's
Hmm.
not until the next step, because usually when someone's throat is slashed and they're lying in a puddle of blood, they're dead. So,
Yeah. The
and
eyes wide open.
right. So, but getting back to the sad thing. So and everyone else probably think, wait, that's not number one. What could be worse than that? And I'll tell you what's worse than that, because I'm Scott. It's a subtle, but to me, it's a heart-splitting moment if you're paying attention. When you get that flashback of Allison when she's rumoring her daughter to go to sleep, and then she's
Hmm.
caught by her husband, that's not it. That's sad, but that's not it. But then you see Allison driving, and then you hear, the
Hmm.
voiceover, the different rumor commands she's clearly been giving over the years, which has, obviously shaped her life. It's shown that she's been using the rumor power to control her child and to get the jobs that have led to her stardom. But the killer one, and my number one saddest thing in the whole damn series, is when you actually hear Allison's voice say, "I heard a rumor that you love me."
Hmm.
Wow, that's the moment. That to me was like, I rewound it and like, oh, because I felt a kick in the stomach kind of feeling, because you realize that's how she got she got her husband.
Hmm.
That's probably, that to me, that's worse than anything else. Getting a
Yeah.
job is getting a job, whatever. Making your kids shut the hell up or whatever, or go to sleep, whatever. But that's really bad.
Right. And in terms of like we talked about like this deconstruction of the superhero, like that's taking a power and it's like one of those like games you play at the bar, like, oh, if you had three wishes, like what would you do? Like if you had a power like that, like what would you do? And like I got to say, I'm a dad. There were a couple of times maybe when my kids were like really young and I really wanted them to get the hell to sleep, and I might have just rumored them to say like, hey, you know what, you should really go to sleep right now. Like that's like some of it, but as it shows in that scene, like all the different things, how she's propelled her career and she's become famous and everybody recognizes her and so on. Like to what degree do you use your superpower to better yourself as an individual and not be working to save the world? So again, it goes back to there's a redemption, there's a redemption story in this for her. And I think even more so in season 2, which is why I like season 2 so much.
Right. I mean, by the time when we catch up to her here, now it's this is the scene where you understand why it seems that she's renounced using her powers, because she obviously came to the realization that she went way too far. I mean, way too far. So let me get off the list thing, because there's going to be enough other lists in this podcast, but we're not up to those yet. Like I said, still avoiding recapping. So now I'm going to start peppering you with questions while we talk about the rest of the season. And I've said a number of times, my issue with the first season, and mind you, this is a season I did rave about. I told people to watch it last year. It came in number 8 on my top 10 dramas of the year, whatever. My main issue, and I did the rewatch, still thought it, was I saw the Vanya stuff coming a mile away.
So obvious.
It's just, I mean, I was actually trying to pay attention to see which is the moment when I was like certain of it, because I think if you're paying attention to the show, or not even paying attention, just watching it, the very first episode you're going, well, that's odd that she doesn't have any powers. That's strange. And you're watching the flashback little moments where it's like, I wonder if there's something going on there. I think you're already inclined to be curious, like wonder if there's something going on here. And then once that guy enters her life, you're like, oh, that's weird. They're spending time on something here. There's something a bit weird, creepy, insidious going on here. Just the feel of it. They're not being very subtle about it. So by the time you hit like the 3rd episode already, if not the 4th, you're already like, yeah, I know where they're gonna go with this. At that point, I think you're just waiting, like, okay, just what is her ability? What is her power? Again, does that ruin the series? Absolutely not. There's any number of things I've watched that I kind of, oh yeah, I saw that coming, but I still could enjoy it. I mean, I wouldn't be such a fan of the Twilight Zone if I didn't like, if I threw out all the episodes and I saw what the ending was coming a mile away.
Right. But I think the difference here, though, is because, and I don't think you and I are the only people that saw, we know this stuff. We've been doing it our whole lives. Right. If there's a superhero team living in a house and one of them is super normal, unless it's, what is that, like the Munsters, it's got this super normal daughter, like at some point that person is going to be the critical person. It's like one of these things is not like the other. But what they do in the show is they take that story, and as they start to explain her upbringing and like showing Reginald like trying to train her, trying to get her to control her power, and then him just getting like honestly like incredibly fearful because he knows the nature of her power, and having to make the choice of not only him locking her up and Pogo as the accomplice, but getting one of the other kids to be an accomplice in that too.
Right.
Like that takes an obvious thing, like, oh, of course she's going to be the big problem, in the 3rd act here, but that they show why that, even us knowing about that by the 2nd episode, or guessing at it, they take it and they do other things with that, which I thought was like just a great storyline. He medicates her and like, ugh, like it's horrible what they do to her.
Right. And no, by the way, that was just when you said it, that reminds me. That's when I knew there was something up. That's when I knew that she was some sort of superpower suppression thing. By the very first time we see her taking medication, I was going, well, there's only one reason you're doing that. Why that you're showing us that? Because why else would you show us that? You don't,
Right.
because
Yep.
you just wouldn't. And it's like, okay. Now, again, and it's exactly what you said. Now, I know what's going to happen, but how is it going to unfold? How are we going to get there? Because if you take a different type of journey to get there, then I'll be interested. And you're right. Especially him involving Allison with the rumor thing, which is just, it's awful, but you understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those, because Reginald he's not a great guy by any stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm. He's not even a guy, as it turns out, but
Right,
whatever.
of course. But another one we should have seen coming, quite frankly. But I'm not going to claim on that one.
Well, I got something to say about that when we get, on a rewatch of season 1. There was a scene that always kind of confused me, and after I saw season 2, I was like, "Oh, okay, now I kind of get this."
I gotcha.
Yeah.
But speaking of plans, especially involving Vanya, a little question. Again, not a big deal. Just the kind of thing that occurred to me, especially when I was watching it the second time. It's about the Leonard character. Or, I want to keep calling him Leonard. I know his name turns out to be, was it Harold Jenkins?
Harold Jenkins, yeah.
Right. But Leonard Peabody, if I recall.
Leonard Peabody just sounds like a butler, like a DC butler or something like that.
So Leonard is already well into his plan of inserting himself into Vanya's life before he finds Reginald's journal, the one that Klaus inadvertently tossed in the dumpster. And that is when Leonard finds out about Vanya actually having powers and how Reginald suppressed them and so on. So my question was, since there's no way Leonard could possibly have known any of that beforehand, what exactly was his plan before that? Was it just to kill one or more of them? Was that his plan? Again, they never have to, we know he's obsessed with them. We get his backstory. We see the pictures in his house with the faces, crossed out, whatever. He's obviously wants to, it looks like he wants to kill them. Is that what his plan was? And it's never really given any traction because obviously once he finds the journal, he knows what he wants to do with her. You know what I'm saying? It just seemed odd to me because he didn't know that from the word go. He found out about it later on. I mean, not much later, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the implication is it's after he's already met her and he's already even walked to her house and stuff, been to her house and stuff.
I get the feeling that because they show us flashback of him standing in front of the house when they go through his whole story, like of him killing his dad and wanting to be part of the Umbrella Academy and getting out of prison. They show him standing in front of the house in the rain, and that's the day that he sees Klaus go out the back and throw the book in the dumpster and so on. I think it's after that he goes and seeks out Vanya. I don't think
was a flashback, and then he sees her after that. Okay, no, I believe
I think it brings his whole story up to the present.
Okay,
and it shows him see Klaus and take that, and then he's like, okay, so this is going to be my in. I'll go after Vanya.
Okay.
Now,
I guess I got the impression that he had already met her, but I will totally concede I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong about that.
Yeah.
So no bad reviews, people. Okay.
I think no, but I think it points out a problem. I can't stand that character. I just don't like this. Whatever. Just like this. I don't like him. I just don't like that she likes him. I don't like that. I don't like that character. And actually, I got thinking on the rewatch. When he really wants to join the Umbrella Academy as a kid. I thought of another movie that I know you're a big fan of The Incredibles. He seems like Syndrome. He's this normal guy that thinks he's special. And he wants to be part of the superhero team that he idolizes. The superhero team blows him off, and then he dedicates his life to, obsessively trying to figure out a way to bring down the superhero team that wouldn't accept him. Seems like Syndrome from The Incredibles, but that was what I felt.
Is that the buddy plot from The Incredibles?
Yes.
Okay, so might as well throw it in here now. Friend of mine who has not appeared on our podcast, but I appeared on a podcast with him a few times years ago, usually to argue about how how bad Star Trek Into Darkness was. He sticks up for it. I don't. Or Iron Man 3. He sticks up for that. I don't. He's not going to listen to this podcast. Who cares? Actually, I'm not berating him. Anyway, he had mentioned some of the things he thought the show was influenced by, at least season 1. And it was funny because one of the things he mentioned was the buddy plot from The Incredibles, which is the thing that you just mentioned. The obvious one to anyone who's a comic book person remotely is the Dark Phoenix storyline. That goes
another
without
one.
Saying.
It's so Dark Phoenix.
Basically, if you know the X-Men, then you know the Dark Phoenix storyline, and we don't need to get. And we're not talking about that stupid, horrible movie with Sophie Turner from last year. We're talking about the great. I'm a DC guy, and I acknowledge those great comics with the Claremont and Byrne, and then so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And he also thought there was a little bit of a dash of Mr. Wint and Mr. Kid from Diamonds Are Forever with Cha-Cha and Hazel. And I was like, okay, I could see that. Not quite but I see the similar. I see where he got that from. He also mentioned something I wasn't familiar with. Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandermeer from Neverwhere, which is a Neil Gaiman thing. I looked into it, but I'm not familiar with it. So, and if neither of us are familiar with it, then we don't need to talk about it.
I knew 3 out of 4 references, but that's it.
Me and you were on the same page. We're people with more hair under our chin than above our eyes. We know this is what we know. Let me see.
Yeah, but I just don't like that character. And you're right. Like his plan, even when she eventually kills him, when she's in a rage and he's like berating her, and I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to he's there like, you're normal, like you're, he's trying to like egg her on to use her powers, but then she winds up getting mad and killing him because he's being a jerk, because the guy is a jerk. I don't get what his whole plan was. Was his plan, once he was in with her, to try to harness her power and get her to use her power against, like when she slashes Rumor Allison's throat, and he walks in, he's got a smile on his face.
Yes, I noticed
when she's freaking out, like he's got this weird smile on his face. Like, oh, good, we got one. Like that's one down. But like, what's his end game? Like, I don't get like what his... Well, eventually what he's going to be. Like, he's going to kill all the other Umbrella Academy people using her power, and then they're going to get married and they'll be their own Umbrella Academy. Like, it's just, I don't get what it is.
I don't know if there is a plan beyond killing the other members of the Umbrella Academy for him. I don't know. My assumption is it's kill them, and then while she's sleeping, he'll kill her as well, or something like that. I don't. But he's a psychopath. I don't like. He doesn't have long range plans. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's not one of the stronger aspects of the season. Also, and kind of going to what you said before, it's one of those things where I understand that Vanya is a very sad and lonely and depressed character.
Damaged.
And she's damaged goods, and maybe all these things, and she's got serious self-esteem issues. Thanks, Dad, and family. And I guess they try to mush that all together as to why she would be so susceptible to someone like Leonard.
Right. So I guess she's got her guard down.
Yeah. So I guess that's why we're supposed to buy it. And fine. I guess we can. I personally am like, but I still think you are perceptive and smart enough to know better. You're not picking up on things here. And it bothers me because to me it becomes one of it. I wouldn't call it a trope. It's not the right phrase exactly for this. But it's a thing where you're watching a TV show or a movie and, someone is with a guy who's clearly not the right guy. Clearly something wrong with that person that anyone else can see. And it's not because, and it's not that the character, the female character is depicted with big hearts in her eyes, she's like lovey-dovey, whatever. but she still is willing to be with this person. It it could be like Rachel McAdams in Wedding Crashers, that everyone on Earth can see what a total asshole Bradley Cooper is, except her, and he doesn't even look that good in that movie. It's not like, well, it's Bradley Cooper. It's like, oh, Bradley Cooper now, maybe not then, or any number of other. I don't know why Wedding Crashers of all shows things came in my head, but you know what I mean. It's just like
I think he's purely thrown in as a plot device to get her powers revealed and to get her story going, because there's no other. I don't know how. I mean, you're the writer. I don't know how else you do that. Like he steals her meds, and so then she's like off her meds, and like he encourages her in this way, and so like he's just like this sort of thing that's thrown. And I kind of like his backstory, like this rejected guy who wanted to be part of the academy. He's born on the same day, abusive dad. She's got an abusive dad in a different way, so they're kind of two peas in a pod. Like his dad's a drunk, like physically abusive guy. Her dad was emotionally abusive. It's the same way that the other big relationship that I cannot stand in the first season is the whole Hazel Agnes story, the waitress from the donut shop. I watched it a second time through, like hoping like, oh, I'm gonna get something. This is just the way to get Hazel to question his existence, is by this like a really two-dimensional character that they throw in. That's another thing about those first 4 episodes before you get to the meat of the show in episode 5. Like all the time back and forth to the donut shop, and Hazel talking about what donuts that he likes, with Agnes, making googly eyes and sitting out back and looking at birds and eating sandwiches. It's just like, oh my God, like you could have packed in a whole other episode of, some action sequences or something. Like I just don't like that,
I don't know if
and then she's also the she's the Perils of Pauline character at the end, because it gives the handler somebody to threaten Hazel with, because Hazel would be threatened on his own. So she, I think, in the same way of like Harold Jenkins, Leonard Peabody, are just these two characters that don't make sense to me, that are thrown in just to push the story forward of these other two main characters. But I don't know. It bugged me.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Sorry.
I'm probably a bit more charitable towards the Agnes character because there's something about I'm not going to say she's the most fully fleshed out, blah 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 blah, but but she doesn't have enough screen time for that. She does. Yeah. She does throw off a couple of really nice lines in the series, which I kind of appreciated. I kind of put a check mark next to that one, and I think it's more so. On one hand, yes, she's not the fully realized character that some of the others are, but I think it's more that she represents something for Hazel, and there's something so, and the fact that he's not been exposed to something that's so sweet and idyllic and innocent, and the fact that they chose a very unconventional way to go about it, which is another thing I appreciate about it, because if someone had told me that Hazel's character ends up meeting this waitress at a donut shop and told me everything that happened, I would imagine that character a certain way. And the way it was cast was like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, good, good for you, Umbrella Academy. That was that's kind of a little bit of gutsy little casting there, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I don't. So I again, and also I'm such a big fan of the actor who plays Hazel. What's his name? Cameron Britton. Huge
what
fan.
else was he in?
Mindhunter.
Oh yeah, he plays
Kemper.
Oh, he plays Kemper but he's got the Coke bottle glasses on.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes, he does.
That's him. That's why he might be my favorite Netflix actor.
Yeah, good podcast on the Mindhunters, by the way. So,
thank you.
Okay, so what?
So anyway, oh, by the way,
so I'm a heartless, son of a bitch, because I don't like the waitress.
Pretty much. Well, it's funny because the history of this podcast, if people know, if only this, well, there'll be like two people who'll get, well, one, two, well, maybe more than two people who are going to get this joke. People who know this podcast well know that Scott usually doesn't care for the waitresses on shows we talk about. That's a Mad Men reference. No one's going to get. Dan liked the waitress character. I hated her. Hated it so much. Oh, by the way, just before I get the thing that Reginald tells Klaus in Klaus's little meeting Dad beyond the grave moment, which is totally fucking great, by the way.
Oh,
especially the girl on the bike who the implication like, so that's God. Oh,
yeah,
well done.
God's like, yeah, this little girl with like a basket full of flowers on like a bicycle, and yeah. So
one of the things that Reginald says to Klaus is that he said something along the lines that he's barely scratched the surface of his abilities. Mm-hmm. So my question is, are the things that happen, say like the manifestation of Ben in the final episode, or going back to Ben, some of the stuff that Ben is able to do in season 2, is that what Reginald's talking about? Because I'm not even clear how much responsibility Klaus has there. Or is it the stuff where we do see in some flashes in season 2 that his ability to communicate with the dead actually goes a lot further? I guess that must be what it is. I guess it's stuff we see in season 2. I don't want to, especially that opening moment. I forgot about that. It just occurred to me.
I just watched that over and over again. Because I think he's one that you have a little difficulty figuring out, like, what's the strength of his power, right? Mm. Like, he's like in season 1, when Hazel and Cha-Cha are torturing him, and he's sort of conjuring up all of like the other people that they've killed on like previous missions, but only he's talking to them, and he's using some of their information to like manipulate or try to manipulate Hazel and Cha-Cha. Right. But like, it still seems like, so you can talk to the dead, and you're also freaked out to the dead by the dead, and you have been your entire life, like in those scenes where his dad like locks him in a crypt at night. As a little boy, he's like 10 more minutes, and he's being like visited by ghosts and ghouls and so on. Mm. You have a difficulty wondering, so what is the value of that power? And I think, when he starts to manifest it physically, particularly more in season 2, and at the end, at the end, it's like, I don't know, it's like one of those things like, people never really realized like what their power was for until the actual moment that they need it the most, and that's when the power happens. Like one of those kinds of things. Yeah. Okay. No, it was one of those things. As I'm asking the question, I'm realizing it's more based on season 1, and I'm realizing there's things I see in season 2, and it all of a sudden occurred to me that what we see in the big opening scene, which never ends up happening, but what he's basically able to summon an entire army, who obviously have physical or tactile abilities. Sorry, just hit my own microphone doing that. Yeah. So I was like, and he's also when he's caught in the field and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay. And I love how his dad in that heaven scene in the barbershop, it goes to black and that's like you said, such a great scene. And they do a few things in the show, like where they play with different kinds of like techniques like that, but it's not like they don't overdo it ever. And like, I just loved that, like that one-off scene in black and white as him in heaven, but his dad basically tells him like, what took you so long? Because earlier in the season, like his brothers and sisters are on him, like, why don't you talk to dad? Like, and he's there like, I can't talk to dad. Like, but like, their dad, Reginald, has always known that he was going to be able to talk to him, because that was part of Reginald's plan of it, ultimately, was that he was going to commit suicide, that was going to bring them all back together, and that he was going to be able to talk to Klaus still and tell him what was really going on. But I just love that. It's such a gentle scene too, like the dad, like, shaving him, sort of cleaning him up, and like, because he's sort of like off the drugs now, and it's like this really like loving scene from a dad that was, again, abusive to him. It's such a great scene.
Yeah, definitely one of the best scenes I thought in the whole season.
I did. Oh, while I think about his suicide, you're gonna hate me for this. The one I was like, God, what are the other movies where people? Because Reginald says, "Well, this is the only way I could get you all back together." Like I wasn't going to pick up the phone, because you wouldn't have come. I got thinking, The Big Chill. Everybody gets back together because somebody's died and they're there for a funeral, and then things happen. So you can hate me now for making a Big Chill reference on your TV podcast, but that was the one that popped to mind.
What's weirder is that I made a reference to The Big Chill on our final Perry Mason podcast.
Oh, did you? I haven't listened to that one yet.
Well, that's bad on you because it's a freaking amazing podcast. And when you hear it, you'll be like, "Oh my god, I never would have known that," because it's so educational. One difference I didn't get into from the comics to the series, which I thought might be a fun thing to mention because I don't know how many people are aware of it, is the characters' actual code names. Because turns out they're not just numbered 1 through 7, and their actual regular names. A couple of these code names are hinted at in the series, such as when Allison's daughter Claire calls Uncle Luther Space Boy when she's talking to her mom. That's actually his code name. And the final episode of season 1 is actually titled The White Violin. That turns out to be Vanya's code name. But I figured, I bet folks don't actually know this unless they've read the comics. I figured I would just fill you guys in on what they are. So again, right? Luther, number 1, he's Space Boy. Diego, number 2, he's, I always mispronounce this word. Is it the Kraken or the Kraken?
Pick one. That's fine.
Kraken.
Pick one.
Well, I'm trying to remember how they say it in Clash of the Titans. Release the Kraken. Release the Kraken.
Or in Pirates of the Caribbean, they make a joke out of it in Pirates of the Caribbean. The one guy says like it's the Kraken, and the evil pirate captain says, "I always thought it was Kraken."
I feel it should be Kraken, so I'm gonna go with Kraken. Allison, number 3, her name is actually, her code name is the Rumor. Klaus, number 4, his code name is the Seance. Number 5, who's basically named 5, his code name is the Boy. Ben was number 6. His code name was the Horror, and yeah. And Vanya, of course, as I already said, number 7, she was the White Violin. And apparently, actually, even Dad had a nickname or a code name. He was the Monocle because Monocle. So there you go.
And then isn't the Seance Klaus? I read someplace that in the book, in the comic, he actually uses a Ouija board.
Yeah.
Is that a true thing? And in the show, he's got like "Hello, Goodbye" like on the palms of his hands. I'm not sure whether that's a comic book thing too, but that's like some Ouija boards have both "Hello" and "Goodbye"
in the corners of the board. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they always have like the basic ones like yes, no, hello, goodbye, because just move it over there. So that way they don't have to be bothered spelling something like that out, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm feeling kind of like we're getting near the wrapping up of season 1. I just want to. There is one thing I want to do for both seasons, as I already pre-warned you. The one thing that I feel this series is especially noteworthy for is their use of music. Oftentimes. It's the juxtaposition of like some bouncy pop tune with a scene of extreme mayhem or violence. But every once in a while it just might happen to be the perfect track to set the mood. Now, there are a number of really great music set pieces throughout season 1, probably even more, not probably, there are more in season 2. So I'm just going to give you my top 5 uses of music in season 1. And no, I'm not going to play them off my iPhone, and so it sounds like this tinny crap, on the podcast. And no, I'm not going to sing parts of them, even though there's a couple here I probably could manage, but I'm not going to do that.
Contact ASCAP, contact BMI.
No. So basically, I'm just going to quickly run through them so that way we can finish up and get to season 2. So coming in at number 5 for me, and I hedged on this one for a while, but I had to put I Think We're Alone Now, the 80s cover by Tiffany. mainly because it's one of the tracks that's literally played in the episode that Luther actually puts on the record to cheer up, remembering their childhood, whatever. It is just such a silly song to choose, so I kind of had to put it there. Number 4 is...
I felt like that scene was a very, the scene in the Breakfast Club where they put music on and all the characters are doing their own dances in different parts of the library. That was like what that resonated for me when they played that.
And there's a scene very much like that in the second season as well, but we'll get there when we get to that.
Yeah, it's not as good, but yeah.
I don't think about that. I think I might rank it higher. So number 4 for me, it's going to be "Don't Stop Me Now" by Queen, which plays when Hazel and Cha-Cha are hunting down number 5 in the department store. I almost didn't want to pick a Queen song because of the whole, I got so tired of everything Queen related because of Bohemian Rhapsody, but it works so well in the scene, I had to put it in there. Now, number 3, it's got to be the use of Istanbul, not Constantinople, the They Might Be Giants song during the diner massacre scene. That one really just set the template for the entire series. So totally a whole lot of fun there. Now, not so much fun, but my number 2 choice, just because it just set a mood so well, so perfectly. And they went super moody here. And that was when they chose to use exit music for a film by Radiohead. That's the track that plays over the montage that closes the 7th episode of the season. It was funny. I was actually shocked to see that I went into my Radiohead playlist on iTunes, and it's only my 62nd most played Radiohead song. And I was like, really? I like the song so much. I've listened to 61 other songs more by Radiohead? Weird. Anyway, very sad and foreboding. It's so well used here. And number 1, since I haven't mentioned it, you might figure it out, even though I got a couple, also rounds here. Number 1 for me, I can't believe it. I got to go with the Bay City Rollers Saturday Night, which is playing when the soldiers are attacking them, the gang at the bowling alley. That works so well in that sequence. It's real, the clapping part where they're saying the S-A-T-U. Oh, it's
so great.
As much fun as Istanbul, not Constantinople as earlier, that just blew past it.
Yeah, I love when they're picking up weapons, like to use it like to fight off the guys, and like somebody grabs a bowling ball, and like somebody grabs like I don't know something else, and like Klaus grabs the birthday cake, like he's going to use that as the weapon to hold off like against these guys. It's so absurd,
right? Also, just the 2 that were just sitting outside the top 5 for me. Nina Simone's cut version of Sinnerman. It's when the Hargreaves are battling Hazel and Cha-Cha at the mansion. And probably a picture book by the Kinks, which we hear really early on in the series, at the very beginning of the first episode when the nannies are pushing the baby carriages. If they'd used more of the song, I probably would have put it in the top 5 because I love that. I personally love that song. But it was too brief, so no, you don't get to be in the top 5.
And I think it's great for the double meaning that it starts a comic book adaptation show with a song called Picture Book. Like I liked that. And I think the only other one I like totally down with everything. I like Heart's Barracuda that they use towards the end when Vanya's getting ready to go to the theater.
Yep.
The top loader cover of the King Harvest dancing in the moonlight, that whole scene with Luther and Allison in The Day That Wasn't, episode 6, I think that's what that was. Such a great scene. I mean, I've seen that scene 3 times and I get choked up every time I see them dancing together to that song. It's, it's 1973. I remembered like driving around in a station wagon with my mom and AM radio with that playing. It's like takes me to another place in time. So like I just love that. One thing I'll say about the music too, that they're in the same way that like the style and the technology and everything is timeless. Like they don't worry about like is the song of the period. Like I know some people on some shows say like, oh, like you're playing this song in 1971 in an episode that came out in 71 and the episode takes place in 1969, and it's just like, ugh, like I get it, like, cause I can be a music snob. I think you can be a music snob, but like this, like it's just about picking the right piece of music to fit the scene, the theme, the energy or whatever you're trying to do. And I just
Yeah,
Love it.
that criticism is only that criticism, as far as I'm concerned, is only valid if it's being played in the episode. If someone
Hmm.
puts on a record in 1969 and it's a record from 1971, yeah, then I have a problem with it because then it's an anachronism. But if it's just
Yeah,
being used on the soundtrack, I don't care. Being
yeah,
Tarantino using a David Bowie song during Inglourious Basterds didn't bother me. It's fine.
yeah,
There are
yeah,
there are countless examples.
yeah.
That does not matter, and they certainly do that in season two, which
Yep.
is even more prevalent.
Even more so. Yeah.
because obviously the show is all in the '60s, and we hear songs that are not from the '60s. Doesn't
Right.
yeah? I would like again if someone like put on a record and it was just didn't make sense, then I'd have an issue because like no, then just play it on the soundtrack. Don't have it be part of the show.
Right.
Okay, so. Oh boy, I spent a little time on that one, didn't we? So, so I'm having a sense of deja vu. So, with all that said, let's get to season two, which was the original reason we were supposed to be podcasting.
Yeah. Oh, you can't talk about season 2 without talking about season 1
I know,
for an hour.
It's fine. I'm not. Hey, it's cover. Blah, blah, blah. This is where the podcast goes off the rails. Get back on track. Let's get to season two. Basically, everyone gets bounced back to Dallas, Texas in the early 60s. And based on that fifth episode of season one, not to mention what pretty much anyone thinks of when you mention Dallas in the early 60s, a lot of the major plotting of the season is going to revolve around the assassination of JFK. But as we discover in the opening minutes of the first episode, hey, once again, the world is going to end. Only this time it's from the more traditional nuclear annihilation. So as the team members each get transported to the same alleyway, but with years separating each one, we spend the season following the lives each character has built for themselves in the early 1960s, which, I think we can both agree before we even get into it, actually results in much better character development than season one delivered for many of these characters.
Mm-hmm.
But don't worry, it's not just about character this season. There's no shortage of plot, as the commission is not only after number 5, now the whole team is being targeted. So we even follow the trials and tribulations of the handler at the commission as she reels from her own demotion. So I know that you were noticing some of the parallels with some of the characters this season. So what you were talking to me about the other day. So fill me in one more time. Or?
Yeah, I feel like they're kind of like finding the things that they were either missing or also had in the first episode. Like, Luther number 1 used to be like the devoted like servant of sorts to his father Reginald, and here in Dallas he's now the the right hand man to Jack Ruby. Allison has lost her family in the 2019 world, and in this one she finds a new husband and in a way finds a new family. Vanya is very much the same way. Like, Vanya doesn't really know who she is in season 1. She doesn't know what her powers are. And then she shows up in season 2 in the 1960s in Dallas, and surprise, she's got amnesia. And once again, she has to take an entire season to figure out who she is, what her powers are. And so we kind of like reset her too. So I feel like everybody's kind of kind of in a better place, but sort of experiencing similar sorts of things. I mean, I think in some ways they're all happier once they land in Dallas and get their lives going, than they were in season 1 when they all got back together. I don't think they were individually like very happy people, and Klaus is a quester, and in the first season it's all about drugs and inebriation and those kinds of things, and now he's sort of flipped that into spirituality, which is not like there's a lot of people that actually go from drugs to spirituality as a way of saving themselves. So I find a lot of that progression to make sense, and in many ways they're in much better places than they were in season 1.
Yeah, I can see that with some of them. I'm not sure Diego's in a better
Diego,
place.
yeah.
Being in the
Diego's hard to
asylum.
peg, though.
And I'm not sure.
But he gets a new girlfriend.
Oh yeah, we're going there in a second. I'm a little iffy on Luther's life being better. Not that he has issues before, and obviously being on the moon, whatever. But basically, being a Fight Club guy for Jack Ruby, I'm not sure what a great existence he has at this point, but it is what it is. One of the things about season 2, we get introduced to a handful of new characters who've entered each Hargreaves' life, and I think this is also one of the really strong suits of this season, because you have these supporting characters that play a significant part in each of these Academy members' storylines, but unlike say like what we were saying about Leonard in season 1, they don't feel, at least for me, they don't feel like plot devices. They feel like they are characters that inhabit their own space and have their own lives and their own backstories. And, yes, they are there, to, as a supporting character does, to prop up a larger, more principal character, but they play a significant part beyond just plotting. There is true emotional stakes with each one of them as well. So those would be like what we just mentioned in a second, Lila. It was played by. Actually, you know what? I didn't mention the actors in the first place for all the other guys. Why am I going to mention these actors? Yeah. So Lila, who was a fellow asylum patient with Diego when he was committed, and of course we find out a whole lot more about her. You've got Sissy. She's the mother and wife who befriended and then took in Vanya after she accidentally hit her with their car. And Raymond Chestnut, really good, who, surprise, surprise, turns out to be Allison's husband. And it's good enough to the point where you become, whereas one would think going into the season, you're just, okay, let's get to it. Let's get to the whole apocalypse thing, whatever. Here, I was equally vested in all these storylines and where they were going as far, and of course, obviously the one with Lila gets a little crazy, but just in general, I was like, I'm genuinely interested and engaged in what's going on here, and it's showing shades of the character from season 1 that we hadn't gotten before, and it's just giving them more to do that just has a bit more meat on the bones, acting wise, character wise, etc. for me.
Yeah, they inhabit their own space, like you said, whereas like the only thing they have in season 1 is coming back to the academy. That's like it. Like that's the whole story. Here they've had a couple of years in some cases to establish new identities. Like, Allison, she's a do-gooder now. Like instead of like using her power to make herself rich and famous, she's not using her power and she's helping the cause of civil rights. So people are inhabiting their own space, finding their own mission of sorts, separate from the others. And relatively, yeah, you can say Luther isn't happy with it, but I don't know. I think Luther likes to be of service to somebody. That's the sense I get of Luther.
I agree.
He's the good soldier, which is why he works for a mafioso. And granted, he has probably less on-screen time than the people I just mentioned. I just didn't find the Jack Ruby character as interesting. We didn't get that much. We didn't get that much of him anyway. So he really doesn't. So it almost doesn't count. He's a plot device, if anything, because he's Jack Ruby, and it's an actor we've seen a million times in a million things, whatever. It's just like it's kind of like we're just waiting for that to end already. But these three, they are with the show and with the series all the way to the very end, and they each play a significant part in the lives of these of Diego, of Vanya, and of Allison. Oh, and by the way, another character I do not want to forget to mention in this podcast, one of my favorite parts of season 2 is the one, and I am going to mention the actor's name, because why not? The wonderful Kevin Rankin, who has played everything. He's been in everything from Friday Night Lights to, I'm pretty sure he was in Sons of Anarchy. I don't know. Actually, was he in a Breaking Bad episode? Don't remember. Doesn't matter. The guy who plays Elliot. He is in Breaking Bad.
He is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh, is he one of the Nazis?
Yeah, he's one of the Nazis.
That's it. Okay. Um,
The conspiracy theorist guy in the old dentist shop.
but
Like,
what I
what a
love
great character.
what I love about him, it's a reminder of when conspiracy nuts were kind of fun as opposed to frightening the way they are nowadays.
Right.
I mean, and what I love about that character, because looking back at season one, outside of the principal members of the academy, Pogo was what we know, how I already described him. Not bad, but whatever. Give me a break with Mom. Robot Mom wasn't, there was nothing to her, whatever. Reginald was Reginald. Don't count him as anything. So, but the supporting players, I mean, the only ones that were of any note were really Hazel and Cha Cha. And they had their own storyline. They weren't really there to facilitate anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, like Elliot's character, it's the way he plays off everybody else is just fantastic. The way he plays off number five is wonderful. One of my favorite scenes in the entire season is when he and when he and Luther get high on the nitrous oxide. It's just it's one of the only moments where Luther seems genuinely happy.
Right.
When he's going on about how horrible his life is, and then Elliot pretty much tops him with his wife who left him for his best friend on their 10th anniversary.
That's kind of like when Luther in season one goes to that rave and gets like drunk and like takes a bunch of drugs and like, he's like trying to like give it all up or something like that.
Except this scene I enjoyed. That scene just made me kind of wince.
That scene made me feel bad for him.
It was just more. That was more tragic. It's like,
the nitrous oxide scene was funny.
Very funny. So,
and what about Fishhead?
Oh, AJ,
another character.
AJ, AJ Carmichael.
Yeah. Again, like that's another one of those like Pogo in season one. When he showed up, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it must be the boss. Like I didn't even think about it. Like it's like anything could happen. It also reminded me of like in The Tick. There's that what's his name? Like Chairhead Chippendale, who was one of the like villains. Like it just had a chair for a head in the Tick comics.
For some reason, that actually The Tick makes more sense now that I think about it. But it seemed to me like something that could have come straight out of like season 2 or 3 of Legion. Because you already have one character who just has a basket on his head the whole time and he's in charge. So,
or like a Dick Tracy character or something.
Who's to say if he took off the basket, it would have been like a fishbowl? Why not? It wasn't, but it could have been.
Yeah.
But where was I saying? Wow, I didn't. Wow, I wrote all this shit and I didn't even know I wrote all this. I love when I write all these notes and then I ignore them and then I look back. It's like, I kind of just touched on a lot of this. Oh, for some reason I decided to make fun of the detectives in season 1 all of a sudden. I have no idea why. Oh, yeah, because we were talking about how like the detectives in season 1 were really there to kind of build up the Diego character, but they're pretty generic city detectives that we've seen 1,000 times before. Whereas Lila is something we haven't seen 1,000 times before. Let's put it that way.
Right. Did Lila have you? Did you see what was coming with her, or did that surprise you a little bit? Like, did you just think when she escaped with them, like in the first episode or something like that, that there's something more going on here?
I didn't.
I didn't either.
I can't lie. I didn't.
I was actually kind of surprised, like pleasantly surprised, like what they wound up doing with her character and how significant she wound up being. Like, I thought she was going to be this kind of like comic relief, like sidekick for the series, for the second season. And then the more and how she ties into the commission and the handler and Five and, all of that stuff, it's just, and then leaves it open-ended at the end. So
I wasn't disappointed in myself that I didn't see that coming. I didn't realize that she was part of the commission and the handler and whatever. I got more annoyed with myself that I didn't see the ability thing coming about and why the handler would have taken her as a child. Because once that once that's revealed, I was kind of like face palming, like, oh, how didn't I see that? I mean, that makes
Well,
so much sense. You know,
well, we know that.
well done. I mean,
Let's do the math. How many more out of 43 are out
yeah,
there?
I know,
So now we know where 8 of them are.
right?
There's 35 to
35
go.
more to go. How many seasons are we gonna have?
Yeah.
Well, apparently, I'm guessing maybe we're going to knock off at least 7 more of them based on what we saw at the end of how the
Yeah.
season ends.
It's interesting that I was noticing the mission that the handler sends 5 on to kill Lila's parents when she kidnaps her. It's mission 743, and there's 7 kids in the Umbrella Academy, and 43 is the number of total births. I just thought that was interesting. Like the mission number is 743.
Look at this show. They think they're lost or something playing with numbers.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
a very lost thing to do.
I do have to say, like, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, having been like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, fan as a kid, like the number 42 being the answer. So, did you know in Japan, in hospitals where they deliver babies, they don't use the room number 43 because 43 means a stillborn child in Japanese superstition.
All right, so I'm going to title this podcast "The Stillborn Podcast."
Oh, I thought like the birth of the children and like maybe there was something, but who knows? Like it's like any of those things. Like, do you go like and you find the evidence that that explains something that really the emo band guy just came up with the number 43 off the top of his head.
My guess with the number 43 was this, because 42 has always been a very significant number. You've got the Hitchhiker's Guide thing you just referenced. Mm-hmm. It's Jackie Robinson's number. so there's that. And though you might think, oh, don't be silly, Jackie Robinson. Hey, did you watch the first few minutes of Lovecraft Country?
Right yeah.
So, shut up. And I just mentioned Lost, and anyone who knows Lost knows that 42 is the last of the major 6 numbers. So 42 is kind of this number that keeps popping up on, it's no 23, but it's up there. So I personally think they literally said, hey, it's kind of like Spinal Tap, it just goes up to 11. Like, let's go one over. Let's go one over 42. It's 43.
Yeah.
No one uses 43. That's just what. So in fact, it's 743. But if it had been like 842, it's like, hey, the 2 lost numbers. Anyway, all right, enough of that.
Yeah.
So one of the things the way I looked at the season was there's kind of a classic thing about, and it happens, but mainly with television series because it has to be a continuing story. Although I can point to a movie example, I suppose. But one of the things is when you deal with a cast, or a group of people, I should say, who tend to be like together, say like in that first season, or maybe first couple seasons, whatever. But invariably, it may be the second season, it usually is, but sometimes it might be the third season, they might push it to another season, whatever. Something's going to happen to fracture the group. And one of the main thrusts of the storyline of that season will be bringing people back together. It's a classic way to do things. There's a number of shows that have done that everyone listening to this podcast has seen these shows. I've mentioned Lost a couple times. Lost, of course, has done that. They separate everyone on the island and eventually bring them back together. Season 3, they're all thrown. Game of Thrones. How long were we waiting for the Lannisters to get all back together? And when is Jaime going to get back? When is Tyrion going to get back? When is this one? When are the Starks going to get back together? It's all in. So one of the major story thrusts is always, when are you going to reunite these characters? So season 2 of Umbrella Academy, we're kind of waiting. When are they going to bring all these people together? It's the nice buildup of that. And what I enjoyed is when we were talking about season 1 being a lot of setup. In season 2, well, we already got the setup. You set it up from the get-go. We got it. Now we're just following these characters and when they're eventually going to meet, but we're so interested in what these storylines are. So it doesn't feel as much of a when are we going to get to it kind of a thing the way season 1 felt. And of course, it's a nice thing that happens where when those storylines or story threads start to intertwine with each other, and we start to see how big a part they actually end up playing in the overall storyline of the overall arc for the show, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the way I was going to go about season 2, since even though we've already well into it, I kind of wanted to break it into each of the storylines, and we could just talk about them kind of separately. And obviously, there'll be some overlapping. Who cares? Nobody's perfect. And the way I was going to phrase it, kind of a classic comic book trope is, whatever happened to. There used to be like a DC backup feature back in the 80s, I think it was, where there was like an extra 8-page story in the back of a whole bunch of comics called Whatever Happened to, and it would be like a character from like, the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and have like a little story. Whatever happened to Sargon the Sorcerer? Or whatever happened to Our Man? Whatever. So I was going to kick it up like, I would start with the one that has clearly added relevance in 2020, and so who I'm going to start with, obviously. It's like, whatever happened to Allison? And what you were saying, Allison's character, in some ways, probably has one of the most interesting storylines throughout the season, especially based on what we know about her character from season 1 and what she did and what she shouldn't have done. Plus, I really, really like the actor playing her husband. I thought he does a really good job, especially and watching him react to the other people in her life, shall we say, her other family members, the other things. I mean, he's almost like a stand-in for us in a way. I really, truly enjoy. I totally and completely enjoy the Allison storyline, like way more than I thought I would.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now I think I already kind of dissed Luther's storyline a moment ago.
Yeah, I get it. There's not a whole lot to it.
Basically there isn't, but because Luther's storyline gets truncated compared to the others. Because he gets once he pretty much loses. Does he lose the fight? Yeah. Once he loses the fight and Jack Ruby kind of kicks him out, then he's like the first one to leave and go follow number 5, and that's why he's hanging out with Elliot, whatever. So his storyline is fairly brief. What you said, I guess that's as good a way to describe it as any. I mean, is it a better life than spending 5 years on the moon? Sure, I'll go.
It's probably an equivalent life in some ways,
if he's not feeling much pain in those fights, and I'm assuming he's not because he's a freaking gorilla, he gets and now the one thing they don't touch on, but I have to admit I was curious if other than the fights, he's pretty much hanging out in this burlesque, strip joint that his boss owns. And we've already established in season 1 that, he's finally been with ladies, finally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of wondering if he's sampled the goods. Because if he has, then yes, his storyline's fine.
I don't think Mr. Ruby would allow that.
Oh. Poor fuck. Anyway, sorry about the curse. All right, but like I said, you know what? The nitrous oxide scene makes up for everything. So who cares?
Yeah.
And Luther gets to factor into some of the funniest scenes in the entire season. So that kind of, to me, that almost makes up for his storyline not being in his stuff at number 5, or especially the fives.
The fight in the grassy knoll.
The fight in the grassy knoll. The stuff in the restaurant. Before we even get.
Again, that's another like you were saying, like in season 1, like creating rules around time travel. Like they dream up this absurd group of like the 5 side effects of like encountering yourself in a time stream.
I think it was 9. I think it was 9.
Yeah, it's like 9.
And number 4, I think, is flatulence.
Yes, like flatulence. Like again, it's like, okay, so because that's always one of the like rules of time travel, right? Like what happens when you meet yourself, and they come up with this absurd. I wish I'd written them down because it's so weird. It's like flatulence and you have difficulty walking, or like I can't remember.
Well,
You're in cold sweats, or you're
there's the
itching.
itchiness is an early one.
Right.
There's the flatulence, and we know, and the most important one is that it leads to number 9, homicidal rage.
Homicidal rage.
So that's the important one.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting with time travel rules because there are, depending who's telling the story. Sometimes, you can't encounter yourself, or you just, something will happen. Like what they're dealing with here. And to other versions, it doesn't make a difference. It genuinely makes no difference whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because did you watch? I can't remember. Have you watched Dark yet?
I watched the first season. I didn't watch the second season
Or the third season then? Oh
no,
dude, get on that. So
I know.
This probably won't. This isn't really much of a spoiler. Just I'll make it more of a joke, because apparently in Dark, at one point or another, it seems like everybody gets with everybody in every time period possible. So, so at a certain point, if they had rules like this, then they really all would have killed each other at some point. It's like, because what's that old song? I'm my own grandpa, whatever it is.
Yeah. Right.
That could be said of everybody on Dark.
Yeah.
It turns out you're my mother and my daughter. That's not a joke. That actually happens. Someone is someone's mother and daughter on Dark. Not a joke. Really happened. Anyway, back to this. Okay.
It's like the end of Chinatown. She's my sister. She's my daughter.
I believe I made that joke on the podcast. I'm pretty sure I did. Of course I'm going to make a Chinatown reference. Yeah. So back to the whatever happens is, I kind of like to lump these two together because I think you kind of have to. It's kind of like what I would say, whatever happened to Klaus and Ben. Because we kind of keep forgetting about Ben. Because he seems like, because obviously quite often he's like an adjunct to Klaus. But I think they give him more to do this. Well,
a lot more.
They absolutely give him more. And there's something just way more tragic about it, but also much more satisfying about it as well. So Klaus is a cult leader, of course. And I love the whole idea of, just like Ben lifting up so he looks like he's levitating above his followers.
Ben's like an accomplice in this whole thing.
And I'm like, okay, so Ben is definitely getting more they're getting the whole tangibility rule better with him. And then he also discovers the whole possession thing. Yeah.
And I love Klaus's. So within this whole, here's another, 5 comes back and there's a whole other like new Armageddon they have to prevent, right? So within that time travel thing, Klaus then has like a sub mission within his time travel to go back and try to convince the guy that he falls in love with in Vietnam not to go to Vietnam. Like, I find that interesting. Like there's like a time travel mission within a time travel mission. It's like two different things. I loved that whole story. And it was surprising to me. It hadn't occurred to me. Like, oh yeah, he could go back in time and he could do something about that, maybe. So,
well, at least he'll try. Yeah, that was actually one of the nice little conceits of the season, and very much your additional story on top of a story. I mean, perhaps Diego was wanting to stop JFK's assassination, which isn't really the point of what their mission is. Kind of feels that way a little bit too, but obviously the Klaus one is much bigger and much more heartfelt, and really works well. And then the Ben stuff, because it turns out that all this time, Ben has actually kind of fallen for one of the cult followers, and then finally gets a moment to actually be with her by taking possession of Klaus's body. Love the stuff of Klaus running around, dealing with Ben possessing him and trying to, and the push and pull of his body kind of reminded me of Steve Martin and All of Me, battling with Lily.
Oh, you took body. That was so the thing that that just immediately reminded me of All of Me. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of that movie. So.
Yeah, Lily Tomlin.
I haven't watched that in a while. But Klaus obviously really, I think, really shines even brighter this season. Obviously, the fact, the stuff that happens when they're trying to save, I guess save Vanya. I don't know how else to put it. Or keep Vanya from blowing up everything, whatever. And just him deciding to take it upon, that he's gonna actually be the one to do it. But the fact he still stops to tell Diego that he looks like Antonio Banderas with his long hair. It's so awesome. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But of course, I love the fact that it was Ben who turned out to be the one who actually saved the day. And I know one of the frustrating things about Ben's existence is that no one seems to be aware that he's there. And it always bothers me, like, why doesn't Klaus just tell them that he's there all the time? Why is he being such a dick all the time? But at least Vanya knows herself that Ben was there, so she can acknowledge that Ben was the one who saved them. No, not Klaus. Although Klaus clearly has something to do with it, because perhaps it's Klaus's abilities to make Ben be tangible, to do what he's able to do. I don't know, but I feel that's the implication. So
yes,
we'll go with that.
I read that too.
I actually wrote something on a post. I'm just seeing if it's anything important. I can't read what I wrote. I love when I do that. All right. So much for that note. All right, back to this. So we're in the home stretch now. So obviously, the ones we save for last are probably the ones who had the biggest storylines that factored into the overall story of the season. So let's get to, and they're both linked by Lila. So let's first go whatever happened to Diego. Diego, who ends up in the asylum, and Lila is a fellow patient. And as we were talking earlier, we find out eventually that there's a lot more to Lila than meets the eye. That she, in fact, she doesn't just work for the commission. She's actually seen as the handler's daughter, but then we find out the backstory there, and then we find out what the real story is, and that she's actually one of the 43. And so we have the big showdown at the end, which was when she does the rumor back to Allison, and that creepy ass smile of glee on her face, like look what I was able to do, and I was like, oh my God, is Allison gonna almost die in every season?
She's gonna choke to death in every season, once on her own blood, once because she stops breathing. But
yeah. So
Lila's power is that she can mirror somebody else's power.
Yes,
that's what I read. Right.
Yes.
And the way they defeat her is if they all go at her at once. She can't channel 6 or 7 powers at once. She can only handle one.
Well, that's the theory. It hasn't. I don't think it's ever proved. They didn't get the chance to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if that's true, because someone says, I think it might be Klaus, and I think Allison is the one who's like, do we know that? Because we don't. We haven't seen anything happen to tell us.
They're just figuring it out.
Because it reminds me of like there's like this whole DC thing, Legion of Superheroes. There's this one character who's got, I think it might be Ultra Lad, if I'm not mistaken. If I've picked the wrong one, I apologize to DC Comics. But I'm pretty sure it was Ultra Lad, who had all these powers, except if I'm not mistaken, he can only use one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily the Legion will have flight rings, so he could always be flying, but like he could be super strong, but he couldn't be invulnerable at the same time, which always seems kind of pointless to me. It's like you're really strong, you can lift something, but then you can break your arm because you're not invulnerable. So what's the point of or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
You can't be super strong and use your X-ray vision at the same time or something, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So and I think I've seen that conceit before, like, you can only use one ability at a time. So maybe that's what they're doing here, but we don't know. And she, yes, right. She escapes on her own at the end with the briefcase.
Yes.
Right. So
it's another cliffhanger moment.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully we will see her again, depending what goes on. But back to Diego, because that opens up some Diego's storyline. I wasn't terribly interested in season 1. He kind of was, I love that both season 1, sorry, going to reference a show you haven't seen again. Another funny thing they have in common. There's a lot of things they have in common. Both season 1 of Doom Patrol and season 1 of Umbrella Academy have a major thing about finding old videotapes of their family members, earlier in their lives. Very strange. Another thing they both do, just a weird coincidence, they both make a Batman reference. which is
No.
really weird. It's even weirder for Umbrella Academy because that's not even a DC Comics property. I think it's Dark Horse, if I'm not mistaken.
It's Dark Horse, yeah.
But number 5 has that great line about Diego where when he's describing it, think, what does he say? Think Batman, but a lot less impressive or a lot less something. Like,
Yeah.
I think I wrote down the line. I can't remember. Because that's pretty much, he's pretty much kind of like superhero light in season 1. But season 2, especially when he goes to the commission and everything from the training film sequence or meeting Herb. By the way, another great character, Herb.
Herb. Great.
Steals every moment he's in this season.
When he's driving that little like tricycle thing through like the archives to find the file for Mission 743. I just love everything that guy does. Like
Herb is fantastic. I loved Herb. He's so good. Again, see the broader and stronger the cast is, it just makes for a more satisfying and more fun season. And Herb is definitely one of those factors. But all the stuff, and I just love the idea that, like, you even see number 5 almost being annoyed at the fact that Diego actually has inside information about the commission, that he actually even knows what the commission is, and that they were even considering making him a member or
an operative,
operative, whatever, because number 5 thinks Diego's kind of an idiot, and he's not completely wrong.
Yeah,
he's not the smartest character,
right?
But then again, number 5 is considerably smarter than at least Diego and Luther. I mean, the Olga, what is it? The Olga moment?
Oh, yeah.
Where it doesn't occur to any one of them that it's an eye for an eye, because I thought that was kind of obvious just by the way.
I thought it was obvious. I didn't even know what it was, but yeah, it was pretty obvious to me.
And we haven't even talked about the Swedes yet, by the way.
Right. Well, you also skipped over whatever happened to Vanya.
Vanya. Oh, I did. Oh, you're right. I did skip Vanya.
She gets knocked out, and she winds up living on a farm with a 60s housewife with a child that's got some sort of learning disability or something like that.
It looks like it might be some form of, he's on the spectrum,
like autistic or something like that.
You're right. I skipped right over Vanya. My mistake.
Keeping us on task here.
Well, thank you. Actually, I phrased it as the no longer Dark Phoenix of the group. Whatever happened to Vanya? I like the Vanya storyline. I recognize the husband. He was actually in one or both of the It movies. As he's the one female character's abusive father. So
he's got his long line of abusive male characters.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's like, oh, okay, I already from the moment you meet him, like, okay, I was expecting, okay, there's going to be a scene where he's going to be drunk and hit somebody. So we did see him get drunk. We didn't see him hit anybody. So I was half right with that character.
I had problems with like that whole. I felt that her storyline really dragged, and I think mainly because she was like in that house most of the time.
Yep.
She wasn't out doing things, and it was, like, oh God, surprise! Like the housewife winds up, having a lesbian relationship with Vanya, and it was almost like overly predictable. I thought the kid's disability, I'm sorry, like it started to kind of wear on me. Like it just, like, where's any of this going? I thought it really dragged that whole story. Like the abusive husband, like I almost could predict where that was going. Like somebody, he was going to die or somebody was going to die. I wasn't satisfied, again, and I love Ellen Page, like, to pieces. But the characters that they pair her up with to be with for both seasons, I'm just not very satisfied with those characters.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I felt they could have tightened it up or just done a little bit more with her. I think the problem you run into with that storyline is it's the amnesia thing.
Yeah.
Because then the whole blank slate idea, and it just like, oh, now, because then it becomes, oh, now I'm not just waiting for her to meet up with the other people, I'm waiting for her to remember who she is. Now, when we finally get there, it does happen in spectacular fashion, and that's when that storyline goes into super ultra overdrive. But it's because we're out of the farmhouse and we're at the FBI headquarters and she's being tortured. But until we get to that, then it's a bit more of torture getting there. I'm a big fan of the actress who plays Sissy. It's Marin Ireland. I know her from Sneaky Pete. She's excellent, especially in the last.
Yeah, she's a good actress.
So it's not I don't fault the actor at all.
No.
It's kind of like what you said. You kind of know where it's going from the get go, and I was like, oh, this season she was going to have a lesbian relationship as opposed to a heterosexual one that she had in season 1, which I wonder if Ellen Page said, hey, could you
write something for me to
that's
do?
kind of like there's more what I that's kind of what I anyway that's why I just said something without saying something. Anyway, one of the things I really thought was interesting about the Vanya stuff, moving away from the stuff with the family and the farmhouse, was when we get to her being tortured by the FBI, which is one of the more harrowing aspects of the entire season, because once they figure out to immediately that woman kind of holds her down and drugs her before she can start really utilizing her abilities, and you realize that they actually do have the upper hand on her, but then they give her the LSD treatment.
Yeah, I love that's a great little historical thing, because the FBI did experiment a lot with mind control and truth serums and stuff using LSD. I thought that was a great little historical factoid thrown in there.
Well, absolutely, and it made perfect sense for what they would have done at that time. And it's one of those things when you realize the way she sounds to an FBI agent. So there's this girl named Vanya who has amnesia, and she happens to be. There's a whole lot of reasons to be suspicious.
Oh, and that whole thing where he does the old thing that goes back all the way to Great Escape or so on. Like, he speaks a sentence quickly in Russian, and she answers in Russian. And in her case, because she has amnesia, she doesn't even know that she can speak Russian, but she can. That's like the oldest thing in the book.
Totally find somebody. It's a Great Escape moment. And the fact that the Great Escape would have only been out like a couple years earlier, it's probably where the guy got the idea from, quite frankly. That makes
hilarious
sense.
Yeah,
there was one
hilarious.
Go on.
The one thing, so because I made an allusion to this for season 1 about Reginald, so in that flashback scene with Reginald in season 1 where he is in some unidentified place and there's an old woman dying and he takes the violin from her, and then that's when they shows him coming to the United States as an immigrant and opening the umbrella store. There's a quick scene before he leaves that room where he's looking across this weird landscape, and there are rockets taking off, and they're like satellite dishes, and it looks like an alien planet. And he's got a jar of these little firefly things in it. And when you go to season 2, and Vanya gives mouth to mouth to the little boy, Sissy's son, I can't remember his name, after he almost drowns in the pond, it's similar firefly kind of things that comes out of her and into him that winds up granting him some sort of telekinetic powers. So I almost wonder if with Reginald's, transfer from whatever alien world he came from, because we find out, surprise, he's an alien in season 2, whether there's some connection to powers, this thing that he brought from another planet, and how, you asked the question, how does he know these children are all going to be born on a day? Was this a thing that he brought from his planet and maybe it got spread around the world and he's trying to bring it all back? I don't know. It's questions around that, but I was making that connection with the little firefly magic power pixie dust kind of stuff.
My assumption is that he or his race of people or creatures, whatever, did play a part in what happened as far as the October 1st, 1989 birthery, whatever, of the 43. Because again, how would he know otherwise? Oh, I actually, well, glad you were talking. Gave me a chance to actually read this post, and now I do know what I wrote here. What a stupid note. But might as well say it, because we're at that part right now. So Vanya's LSD trip, and when she has the main piece of it is her sitting down at the table, and they're all eating brains, essentially. And, and Reginald is yelling at her, to eat it, and that's the way she'll remember, whatever. Just a little thing I noticed, and again, it doesn't matter at all, because obviously everyone, not including number 5, it's the way they look now, but they're wearing their little school blazers. Academy blazers, I should say. So, Diego's got the long hair. Allison's got the hair that she has now, whatever. Even though I don't think at this point Vanya's seen her with that hair, but whatever. Fine. But one thing I noticed is that I guess the wardrobe department didn't want to have to deal with the idea of creating like a giant size version of the blazer. So Luther does not have his ape body. He doesn't have the ape arms and shoulders and whatever. He's just like a normal guy wearing the blazer. And I was going, oh, that's interesting. I was like, I guess they didn't want to be bothered trying to construct a blazer to fit around that huge body. Maybe they couldn't figure out a way to do it where it wouldn't look ridiculous. And even though I said, no, they should have done it, especially if it looked ridiculous. I was really wanted to see that. Anyway, like I said, it wasn't really important. The only other thing I wrote on this note was, gotta love Herb.
Gotta love Herb, yeah. Just like one broad thing about, season 2 where, I didn't read the comics, so I didn't know what it was going to be about. But when I heard that it was about the JFK assassination, I mean, again, not the only person, but I love a great JFK assassination thing, whether it's, the JFK movie. Interesting, like with the time travel one, there was that adaptation of the Stephen King book, 11/23/63 with James Franco, which was a Hulu thing about a guy that. Did you ever watch that?
I have not. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, basically, there's a diner with a closet, and when you walk through that closet, you wind up back in Dallas like 3 days before the Kennedy assassination, and James Franco's character meets a guy that has been spending decades going back and trying to stop the Kennedy assassination, and he dies of cancer. Excuse me, from trying to time travel too much. So James Franco takes up the mantle to start doing this himself. And every time something happens, you reset back to the same moment. So the time travel and the JFK assassination, I mean, there just seems to be a fascination with it. And I will say, because it's a TV podcast, one of my favorite shows of all time that had to do with time travel was Quantum Leap. And in the final season, the first 2 episodes, it was a 2-parter about the JFK assassination. And you think the whole did you ever watch Quantum Leap? Familiar with it?
Quantum Leap might have been mentioned on our podcast a couple times. Dan's a huge Quantum Leap fan.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Quantum Leap fan. We've talked about it 1,000
Do you know
times.
the Lee Harvey Oswald?
Yes, of course.
So it's right.
Yeah.
And the conceit in that is that he wasn't going back to save Kennedy. He winds up going back to save Jackie, because in the real time stream she gets killed too. So I love that twist too, where they think in this it has to do with saving JFK. Like Diego's convinced, like, the guy with the umbrella, which is a great tie into the Umbrella Academy, like he's going to save JFK, when really it's something else that's going on. It's like, once again, they have to stop Vanya, Like they think it's going to be one thing, and no, once again we got to stop Vanya.
No, yeah, exactly. It repeats that, and the irony is that no, it's like no, we have to make sure JFK does get assassinated.
Right,
We can't change that because otherwise,
right.
everything will go kablooey either way.
It's the whole fight at the grassy knoll
right.
with the fives of two different time periods.
So good.
Yeah, oh, it's so good. And again, like if you go back and watch season one, like the first time through when you're watching season one, you might not even pick up that that's an old man at the grassy knoll, like in that quick flashback, like when they see him through the temporal like blue cloud thing. But then it becomes very obvious in season two. So they already had that scene like shot, like in some ways, when they premiered season one, because it's the same actor, it's the same setting, it's the same everything.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if they had the rest of the scene shot because there's other things that aren't there that are different, but
the cars are a little different.
Yeah. But they already knew
the idea
where
was
they
there.
were going to go because both comic book series already existed. There was already the Umbrella Academy Dallas limited series that came out like a year after the first one did. So they already knew it was like, hey, if we get renewed, this is where we're going. Let's just put this. So let's so it has to be there anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, the line I couldn't remember was "Imagine Batman, then aim lower." That was the line. which is even better than I was remembering it. So what else? Because we kind of finished it with on. We were on the. I think we're on the Diego now. Actually, we're probably moving from Diego to 5 at this point because the only other thing I wanted to say about Diego beyond really did enjoy his storyline was, did anybody notice that every time like one of these characters dropped out of the sky due to transporting through time, and they usually just ended up on their back or in a dumpster or whatever. Diego's the one who lands like a superhero.
Oh yeah,
he does the classic superhero landing. Yeah. Which I thought was like, okay, now they're just making a joke because we know how ridiculous that is. It's like the biggest superhero movie cliche of all time. Everybody lands like that. It's like, it makes no sense whatsoever.
But that's his thing, is like in a show that's ostensibly about superheroes, he's the only one who really tries hard to act like a superhero, like the Green Hornet style, like car, like running around town with like a police scanner, and like he's kind of like a half-assed superhero,
Number 5 put it succinctly. Imagine Batman, then aim lower. And my cat just meowed. Thanks.
Yeah.
He's going to start meowing for water now.
His other great nickname that he had for somebody was the 3 Swede assassins. He calls them the IKEA Mafia, I think. At some point, he refers to them as the IKEA Mafia.
I love the Swedes. Feel like they're straight out of like a Coen Brothers movie or something like that.
Yeah,
I kind of enjoyed them and they also factor into a list that's coming up in a few minutes. But spoiler. Speaking of things being spoiled, another thing, just falling under the category of anybody noticed. So, that moment, oh God, that moment where they're taking the elevator up to see Daddy Hargreaves, and apparently Luther stinks up the elevator with like a killer fart of some sort.
Yeah.
If you watch that scene, do you notice that the actor, it's David Castaneda, which is Diego, he's in the back. He's the one who can't keep a straight face. Because his character is not one who's inclined to crack up. He's trying not to crack up. And it's very clear where everyone's putting on a face like of disgust or whatever. And he's the one who's like going, trying not to laugh. And I'm watching like, I don't know if that was intent. I don't know if that's what he was supposed to be doing or not. They decided to go with it because I enjoyed it, but it seemed more genuine than anything else. So
anything else, yeah.
Again, number 5, who obviously is a big fan favorite, and the fight of the fives is fantastic. And Luther being put in the middle and having them, alternate and kicking his balls just to keep him out of the fight, which is great. But The funny thing is that the older, well, the 58, the one who looks like a 58-year-old, his plan actually makes a lot of sense. And I love, of course, they both know what the other one's going to do because they're the same person. They're only like 14 minutes apart. So I really did enjoy all of that. So but the stuff with the handler and the commission, and by the way, we haven't really mentioned, I think it's Kate Walsh plays the handler.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about someone who probably loves the outfits they put her in because they go crazy with the costume design on her. She is another, shitload of fun. She is just chewing up the scenery whenever possible. I'm very curious about that weird scar she has on her cheek. But she's just great antagonist who we kind of had as an antagonist in season 1, but they really use it at a much greater effect, I think, in season 2.
Yeah, I was surprised when I went back and rewatched season 1 how little a part she plays in season 1.
Yeah.
I mean, she's there, but like she's really not there a whole lot, and then she's basically the big bad and I don't know. That's the other thing about season 2. There's a lot of bad guys. There's the abusive husband that Vanya's dealing with. There's the racists that Allison and her civil rights protesters are dealing with. There's, there's like multiple bad guys for them to fight along the way. Obviously there's the handler. So there's sort of like multiple villains where really there's, I guess what's Mr. Peabody there in the first episode is a villain, but even Hazel and Cha-Cha are, they're kind of villains, but they're kind of not. Like,
well, Cha-Cha is.
Cha-Cha.
You can kind of make a case for Hazel one way or the other. He's initially a villain who kind of comes over, but Cha-Cha's a villain right until she gets blasted. or doesn't get blasted now, which means she could be in season 3. Plus it's Mary J. Blige.
Yeah, Mary J. Blige.
Can we just,
I know.
Who would have thought Mary J. Blige? And how do they resist not putting a Mary J. Blige song on the soundtrack at some point? Shocking.
Yeah, I had to. I had to convince somebody that was actually Mary J. Blige.
Oh, it's absolutely her.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know. It's like, that's Mary J. Blige.
I think
firing a machine gun and wearing like a dog head and.
Does it really ever make sense that they're wearing just bouncing because we're finishing up season 2 anyway? Bouncing back to season 1 for a second. Does it really make sense that they're ever wearing the big mask? Because we've seen members of the commission don't all wear them. So what's the point of them wearing them?
Well, it's weird in that final showdown on the farm in season 2, where a
few of them are, but most of them aren't.
There's like 1,000 of them show up, and some are wearing those red gas masks that you saw in the big fight at the bowling alley and in the theater in season 1. Some are wearing different animal heads. It seems kind of inconsistent about why.
Yeah, maybe it's maybe like hair, it's a style choice. I don't know.
Yeah, personal preference. Feeling very dog-heady today.
Yeah, pretty much. Trying to think of other little things. Again, this is more about aesthetics, but I also noticed things, but we mentioned things like this on the podcast. I noticed that the color palette for season 2 is way brighter and way more colorful than season 1 is, season 1 is pretty dark and stripped down for the most part, where season 2, it's just brighter all throughout. I don't know if that's just indicative of the time period because it's the early 60s. I would think it'd be more the case if it was the 50s, but whatever.
Yeah. I think it's I think a lot of it's to evoke, suburbia.
It's a reflection of the times.
The hair salon. That's.
And they also get
talking about the dance.
Oh yeah, we're not up to that yet.
No, go ahead.
That's the music.
I stopped myself.
I know.
Yeah.
I also noticed that they got a lot more creative in season 2 with using like on-screen inserted fonts kind of stuff, like for whatever the time period was, the locations. Even the end credits were in a different kind of style font, where they didn't really get that fancy in the first.
It was consistent in season 1. Yeah.
So
and the the whole cult. I mean, that was very flowery and colorful. You know, that was part of it too.
Yep. Yep.
Part of that color palette. Yeah. You know, one thing we didn't say, I didn't get to mention about like the time period, another thing, like I absolutely like hands down, like love is the space race and the whole thing about Pogo's backstory about he was one of the initial like primates used in the Mercury program to go up and orbit in a rocket. Like I just love that. Like I said, I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for a backstory on Pogo, but once they gave me that, I was so psyched that that's what we got. You know, makes me think of The Right Stuff and all those, you know, kinds of movies that, you know, I just love that time period.
I'll just say yes because I don't want to step on something I'm going to say later. So yeah.
Okay.
No. Everything is fine. You could talk about it as much.
I know you're going to probably talk about a song, but
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, just to drive you even more crazy and for everybody out there. Hey, kids, here's a little bit of maddening fun if you really want to drive yourself crazy and if you ever should do a rewatch of season 2. It turns out there's actually 43 sparrows, literal sparrows, hidden throughout season 2 of The Umbrella Academy. So, you know, there are videos you can find on YouTube now that highlight where they all are, but if you're watching really closely, you will actually become aware that they are everywhere. You're going to see them on the sides of trucks, on letterheads, on signs and shelves, and pretty much everywhere imaginable. I think at the very end where we see the kid, oh, by the way, the kid's name is Harlan. I forgot to mention it earlier.
Yes, Harlan. Yeah.
I'm assuming it was named after Harlan Ellison. That even towards the very end, what is the toy he's playing with in the back of the car? It's a sparrow. So this
he's levitating it. Yeah.
Right. So this all culminates when they show up at the end of the series, and in April of 2019, they discover there's a different academy occupying the Hargreaves compound, which he refers to as the Sparrow Academy. So basically, in Hargreaves' mind, he refers to all the 43 birds as sparrows. So that's hence why it's on. So kind of a fun little thing there. By the way, speaking of Hargreaves, I just, because you and I were talking about the Batman trailer before we started recording this podcast, it kind of occurred to me, between his obsessions with umbrellas and now apparently birds as well, are we sure that he's not like a distant relative of Oswald Cobblepot? I mean, I know he's an alien, but couldn't he still be... He's got umbrellas, he's got birds. I mean, come on, that's the Penguin. Anyway, sure he's not the Penguin's dad. He could be the Penguin's dad. It's not Paul Rubens anymore. So. Hey, you know, since you just met, let's go to my music list for the season, and if there's anything else we want to mention, we can, because it's only been 2 hours and 20 minutes.
That's all right.
So.
Brief. You know, this is why we only do this once every 29 months.
How we get? This one ends up being longer than the Doom Patrol one. It's inexcusable. Anyway.
2 seasons.
Yeah, there's 2 seasons of that. And anyway,
yeah.
Don't get me started. And I spent like a half an hour on history on that one. So my top 5 uses of music for season 2. I would kick off the top 5 with that dancey moment that we referred to before, the Sam Cooke's Twisting the Night Away, because it's a rare, oh so rare, happy moment with multiple Hargrave family members on the show, with Allison, Klaus, and Vanya partying down at the beauty salon. I mean, it's very, like I said earlier, it's very similar in some ways to the I Think We're Alone Now moment from season 1. I think it kind of echoes that to a certain extent. And it's kind of funny noticing like how at least 2 of the 3 are somewhat coordinated. One of them, she's just really white. Sorry, Miss Page, but you know.
She did get bumped on the head.
Yeah, you know, that's right.
And she came through the time vortex.
But you'd think someone who can play a musical instrument and are built anyway. Now, doing this music list for season 2 was much more difficult because there were so many good choices.
So much good stuff.
And there are things I left out, which I think, but you know, we'll get to those. My number 4 is actually going to be Sinatra's My Way. And I kept thinking that if this scene, the opening scene, had taken place in the late 70s as opposed to the early 60s, that they might have went with the Sid Vicious version instead of the Sinatra version. But of course, it's during the unforgettable opening scene of the Hargreaves in battle with the Russians, just before the bomb drops. It works really well.
We didn't even mention that opening scene. That opening scene I know that, but with them in battle in full on like coordinated like black leather like superhero, like they look like a superhero team, like they look like the X-Men or something like that, and like I was just like, oh man, like I understand why they did it and so on, but like it makes me want to see a full on Hargreaves team like fighting some big bad in a subsequent season like that. But I don't know. But maybe that's not the point of the series too. I mean, it's not supposed to be that. But I just love that. I've gone back and watched that probably 15 or 20 times, like that 30-second battle that they have.
I've not watched it that many times. I've watched it 3 times. Anyway, back to the list. My number 3 choice would be the Swedish cover of Adele's Hello by Maj Kolsevik. This plays primarily during the Swedes' Viking funeral. It was just amazingly funny for them to go there. I mean, the Adele song is immediately recognizable. And once you realize it's in Swedish, it's like, oh, that's just hysterical. It made me care about the Swedes, and I didn't think that was possible. The Swedes actually have a number of really kind of fun moments throughout the season, especially when the final Swede decides, enough is enough. He agrees with 5 and drops his gun and walks, and then he gets on the bus with the cult, which is that's just a lovely bringing together of 2 disparate storylines that should have nothing to do with one another. Number 2. I gotta go with the Everybody's Backstreet's Back by the Backstreet Boys. Not a Backstreet Boys fan myself, but oh my God, how much fun was it to hear that playing while Allison and her husband are fighting the Swedes. Talking about music not fitting the time, but who cares? It just worked. So
well, and I love that Klaus. I mean, I don't think it ever appears as a song, but Klaus bases like his whole religion largely on like that the Waterfalls song.
Which they amazingly do not use, but then he quotes the Backstreet Boys song, and they do go right into the song for that.
right. So basically, his whole religion is based on like pop hits.
Yeah. Oh, I guarantee that's what he's been doing. I absolutely guarantee. I mean. Another show with time travel was the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that just wrapped up. And actually, one episode featured a couple of the characters were trapped for a year or 2 in the 80s. And they separate from each other because one of them is just in deep depression mourning because his parents got killed or whatever. So the other one goes off into the thing, and he ends up being like this extraordinarily successful, I was going to say cover band, but the thing is, they're not a cover band because they're doing songs that no one knows yet. So he's doing like, the Simple Minds song from Breakfast Club like 2 years before that movie came out. And I was like, oh, this is the best song. And I'm like, oh, I see. It's like, this is kind of screwing up the time stream just a little bit.
It's the whole conceit of that movie Yesterday, which I know you're a Beatles fan here.
So good. But my number 1 choice, as we've already hinted at, it's going to be Major Tom by Peter Schilling, and which plays during the Pogo backstory, which I'd also go as far as say it's not just the Pogo backstory, it's also the Grace backstory.
Yeah.
So that which I found very interesting, which I totally was not expecting. I was also just, other than the fact that I've always been a big fan of that song, I actually had the single and whatnot. I was happy that they chose to go with that song instead of something more obvious like David Bowie's Space Oddity. So going with that, the poppiness of it just works so well. And
probably cheaper to license too.
Maybe,
I don't
maybe
know. I
you'd
have
be
no idea.
surprised.
They spent a lot of money licensing
Yeah, I
music.
was gonna
In the
say
second,
I don't think they're really that concerned about the money on
yeah,
licensing songs.
yeah. When you look at the number of songs, and there's like a Spotify official playlist from Netflix, and you can play these soundtracks,
Oh
like
yeah,
including the classical stuff, and like they're great. I've been playing them for weeks. Um, when you look at the number of songs in season two versus season one, there's like twice as many
yep,
like like pop songs that they went out and got for this.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
The,
I liked Billy Idol's "Dancing with Myself"
yeah, I was
with
gonna say yeah.
the fight the fight at the grassy. It seemed obvious, but
It's
it
interesting
was fun.
it's interesting they sometimes list that song as Generation X, which was Billy Idol's band before he went
Right?
solo. So
Yeah,
I guess they might have recorded that with him first. I don't know. But yeah,
yeah.
the two that I had that just missed my top five, or you could say they're in a three-way tie for number five. If I was going to do that. That's one of them because I'm an '80s kid, so of course I'm going to have that
hmm
one in there. And I also really got a kick out of them using the Butthole Surfers Pepper.
Oh, yeah. Butthole Surfers is one of my like all time favorite bands, and like lyrically, it's so perfect. It was perfect because of it sounds trippy.
Hmm.
Because this is the acid thing, but all the lyrics is about being in Texas and in Dallas and so on, like, because they're from Austin, the Butthole Surfers are. And so, like, lyrically it works, and then tonally it works for the scene. That such a great, and I don't know whether I've ever heard a Butthole Surfers song in a television program before. Um,
I'd have to look into it. I feel like it's happened, but I can't say for
yeah.
sure. Usually, when
And,
you look up a song on Wikipedia, that'll mention if it's
yeah.
been used in
Yeah.
anything.
And
Just
the other, like, just absolute, like, weird choice that I actually stood up from the couch and started applauding with my children and my wife looking at me strangely was the Kiss song "I Was Made for Loving You," because it's such a weird Kiss song. Like, it's not like one of their like classics. It's like a weird, like, later period, like, deep cut. And that's not deep cut because it was a pop song, but but like, I don't know. It's so weird that they picked that Kiss song of any Kiss songs, but yeah, I just loved that.
I, I specifically chose not to put that song in my top.
Yeah, it's like if you were gonna pick a Kiss song that is not a Kiss song, that would be the one that you would pick, and that's why I loved it. It's such a weird choice.
By the way, we never know what city the Umbrella Academy takes place in, do we?
It doesn't name it. I think I think that's
No,
intentional. I mean,
no, I do think it's intentional. I just think
yeah.
I forgot to mention it before because obviously when they can say, "Oh, it feels like New York" or this point, but it's like no. I think they deliberately do not say what city it is.
Yeah, they shot it in Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario.
Well,
I did look it up just to.
that's a money thing also. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and one like absolute weird thing, because I also mentioned this show when in season one, when Hazel and Agnes, my favorite couple, go on the run, and the motel that they stop at is the same motel that is the centerpiece of that Schitt's Creek show that just wrapped up. Like, that's the motel that all of the action at Schitt's Creek happens in for multiple seasons.
oh, I didn't know
'Cause
that.
that's also a Canadian produced show. I only saw it on the third viewing through because I had just finished watching Schitt's Creek a week and a half ago. I was like, oh yeah, and then I looked it up online and was like, oh yeah, it is. It's in Hamilton, Ontario. So
Oh, there you
anyway,
go. Um,
it
so
means nothing, but whatever.
no, it's
TV
fine.
nerds, hashtag nerds.
That's what the podcast is for.
Yep.
That's what. So yeah, so then we end up with the big cliffhanger that we end the series with, where they do show up, and it's the Sparrow Academy. So we wonder where they go from here with season three, and now are they going to pick up at this very moment? Is it days late? I'm assuming they're going to pick up at that very moment because I feel like they kind of have to. It's one of those things, and if you can, when you pause to look at who those members of the Spiral Academy are that are up on the landing, there's that one of them looks like a floating glowing box,
I know it.
like an infinity cube or something.
Yeah, I know.
Which I totally thought that was like a nod to.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, but yeah, very much looking forward to that. And I'm wondering because wait, when they come back, it's supposed to be a day or two after the apocalypse would have happened, but obviously it didn't happen, right? They don't come back before that.
They come back, I think it's 2 days after the apocalypse.
So Pogo's still oh, but because things change, Pogo could still be alive. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
Pogo could still be alive.
If Reginald is alive, then Pogo could be alive.
Right. And, well, it's also how they get around that they just, Ben just faded away at the end of, season 2, and there's like evil Ben back at the Sparrow Academy. So you get Ben continues in some way into this next season, even though he, technically finally died off.
I don't know if I like you assuming that they're evil. No, I'm just kidding.
That they're what?
You're just assuming they're evil. You don't know if they're evil.
He's got, Ben's got an evil-looking haircut. I've seen enough like episodes of like doppelgangers. Like in Star Trek.
I didn't see a goatee. I saw no.
Yeah,
goatee.
You give somebody a goatee. That's the equivalent. Yeah, you can't give a young, good-looking kid like that a goatee.
Oh, yes, you could.
Mr. Spock, you can though. But...
All right, it's good Lord 2, 3, 4. I'm wrapping this fucker up.
Yeah.
So, but long story short, I think we both although we're both fans of the show. I think we both preferred season 2 over season 1 for a number of reasons. Just stronger character development, less predictability, just a better, fully fleshed out cast, better supporting players. And again, I really like season 1, but season 2 I thought was substantially better. And I keep comparing it to that show you haven't seen as of yet. So basically, for people who are watching Doom Patrol season 1 definitely better than season 1 of Umbrella Academy, and way crazier. Season 2, however, that's a tough one. I'm kind of might be a dead heat. Or if I put my DC bias aside, I might be inclined to give it to Umbrella Academy. That's a tough one. They're close. They're very close. A lot of good music too. Mm-hmm. Although Doom Patrol uses music too, but they just don't have the same budget. So maybe they use 5, 6, 7 songs in a season as opposed to 1,000 like this show does. Anyway, I don't know why I'm digressing into Doom Patrol. Anyway. So
I think it's worth. I mean, you obviously love Doom Patrol, but like, the streaming services are just giving so many opportunities for like great other stories that would have never found a place on regular TV or in the movie theater. You would have never gotten a Doom Patrol movie. You wouldn't have gotten this in the movies. Although I heard that this was going to maybe be a movie, and then Netflix bought the rights to the Umbrella Academy, like while it was being developed into a feature. Other things like The Boys, which I don't know whether you watched that. Did you watch season 1 of The Boys?
The Boys is about to be a topic of conversation in about a minute, so yeah.
Okay. So
I need to send you my notes.
The Boys season 2 that's coming out very, very soon. The Watchmen sequel of sorts that was out last year.
Well, yeah, but these are things that are constructed for continuing series. I mean, longer format series telling that they wouldn't really work for movies. So
yeah,
I don't think the Umbrella Academy would work as a single movie. I think there's too much to compress into an hour and a half to 2 hours. The same with Watchmen, the same with Doom Patrol, etc. But now that you can have, it's a combination of streaming services, but not just streaming services, because HBO. But it's the fact that you can treat this kind of material like the same way you would treat any prestige series. So you can spend the money, and you can get the people both in front of the camera and behind the camera who once upon a time you would only associate with a certain level of or type of TV show. They wouldn't do genre shows like this. Maybe they would, the close they do with the genre is like, well, The Wire is a cop show. No, it's not. Or The Sopranos is a gangster show. No, it's not. But, they would certainly never do like a superhero show. But then again, these aren't just superhero shows.
They're not superhero shows.
They're something totally more than that. Whether it be Watchmen, whether it be The Umbrella Academy, whether it even be Doom Patrol or what have you. So, it all goes to the whole peak TV thing, and we've got a million things to watch now, and things that we never would have seen the light of day, even, 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, So we're fortunate. It's just a matter of finding time to watch all this stuff and being thankful that it takes forever to get from season to season, because glad, it's like, oh my God, there's another season of Mandalorian coming.
Yep.
I know you've seen it, so I just
yeah. Well, and the other thing, like I had never heard of the Umbrella Academy, and I watched the first episode about 3 minutes after I heard of the Umbrella Academy for the first time. I heard no press about it. I'd never read the comic book. I didn't know anything about it. It popped up on Netflix one day, and I was like, "Oh wow, this looks like something I would like." And then I watched it. The same thing with The Boys. It was the same thing. Well, this kind of thing. So it's like Netflix or any of these things. It's like it's like the spinner rack in the drugstore. It's like pulling a comic book up. Like, oh, this looks like something I would like. I've never heard of this before, but it looks like it's got a cool cover and characters I might like, and I like this explosion on it. Like in both of those cases with those things, like I had zero preconceived notions going in, and I find that refreshing too, because everything, like we were talking about Batman before this, like how many times have we watched that trailer? Like I had no idea about either of those things coming out. And I don't live under a rock. But yeah, they were just great surprises.
Yes.
All right.
I figure if I don't say anything more than that, I won't engage it, so I can.
All right.
I cannot believe this is longer than the Doom Patrol podcast. I cannot believe that. All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, and even if it took you a week to listen to it, you'll also enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page. It's the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page and join the conversation about shows, well, like this one and so many others that I am too tired to even come up with to list. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts. That's right. It's not iTunes anymore. I just figured that out like 2 days ago or 2 weeks ago. It's probably been different for like 2 years. But you can find us there, subscribe to our feed, and you can rate and review us. It takes me forever to figure out. Never mind. You can also just go to our entire archive of podcasts. Go to stvdpodcast.podbean.com. You can go back in time and listen to the last time Kimber was on the podcast. That was episode number 201. It was the one right after we did number 200. And we were so worn out because that one was over 3 hours that we didn't spend nearly as long with Kimber that time, unlike this time, which at this rate is going to be 3 hours. Oh, God. And, what else? Twitter. Yes, you can follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is at STVD Podcast, STVD as in Serious TV Drama Podcast. Other than that, if you just type in Serious TV Drama Podcast or even STVD Podcast into Google, you'll probably find us in 800 other places. We're even on YouTube, apparently, although some countries we're not. I don't know. I think, rights issues. I don't know. Not for this podcast, because I didn't sing any of those songs, so we'll be fine. Anyway, so that is it for tonight. As far as future podcasts, honestly, I don't know if there's really time or demand for a Stargirl podcast, so that's probably not going to happen after all. I think it should have happened when the season was on. It's too bad because that was a really good season, and the finale was, especially if you're an old school DC fan, you would be very pleased with the way that show ended. Someone on this podcast unexpectedly mentioned the show The Boys. I was not expecting that to be mentioned before I was going to say something about it now. I was going to say I do want to pull off a podcast for The Boys. Perhaps give it the same treatment as Doom Patrol and Umbrella Academy, unless it's going to be 2 hours and 40 minutes, in which case I'm not going to do it. So my plan is I'm going to think long and hard on this one and also figure out who my co-host is going to be. Apparently other men with beards are I can't get them to shut up either, just like myself. Jamie watches. Jamie doesn't. Jamie won't say anything. No, I'm just kidding, Jamie. But we'll see. That way, there's plenty of time to do a rewatch of season 1 before the end of the month, and then season 2 premieres in early September. So perhaps a podcast can follow that within a week or less. We shall see. Because beyond that, there may not be anything I can really guarantee happening until Fargo season 4 starts, and that's not till the end of September. Dan, I know, will finally want to return to the podcast for that, although I believe he's already scheduled to miss a few right off the bat, so someone else will probably be stepping into the breach at least a couple times for that one. Odds are it's either going to be the lawyer guy or the Missouri girl. We'll see which one is up for it. And Kimber, if we hadn't been recording till after midnight, I was prepared to do a Quickie Crown podcast with you. And I even wrote notes for it. Not going to happen now. So, you never know. If we have a spare,
sometime.
Yeah. Because I literally was going to that was going to be like a half an hour podcast.
There's a new trailer that just dropped, so maybe it could be a combo. So, yeah.
It's on the goddamn Facebook page. Anyway. Did you put it there? I can't remember.
I did.
I think it was you. It would have been Dan because he never got back to it. So, yeah, I had notes. I had who's going to casting things. I went back and I checked out which were the good episodes, whatever. It's going to be a nice, tight podcast, the opposite of this one. Got to find out if I can record by myself. No, just kidding. Anyway, I'm the one who did most of the talking. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Apologies if you don't like long podcasts, and congratulations if you do, because, boy, we got one for you this time. Kimber, it was great talking to you again. I haven't talked to you in a while, because you've been ignoring any of my pleas to I would have gone to see that movie with you, bastard. Well,
what's going to a movie?
But so yeah, that's pre-2020. That's pre-2020. It's all moot.
Right. Well, we'll do another one. We'll pick a subject. Mandalorian.
After season 2.
Yeah.
And we could do 2 seasons at once, and then spend like 5 hours on that.
Don't get me started on Star Wars. It could be,
Okay, then it's not going to happen then.
Yeah.
All right. With all that said, thank you very much for joining the podcast, and thank you to everybody out there. And my thing is letting the guests say good night at the end. So good night, Kimber. Good night, everybody, and you can have the final word.
Good night, everybody. Great to talk to you, Scott.